Call this meeting of Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
And Councilmember Daniel Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Grimes.
Here.
Councilmember Nail.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Councilmember Seaman.
Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
We do not have any additional agenda items this evening. Just a quick scheduling update. We have a council budget work session scheduled for this Thursday evening, April 19th, followed by our regular meeting Monday the 23rd with more budget stuff. Then the following Monday, April 30th, additional budget work session and our second public hearing on the budget and also our constant yield tax rate public hearing. And then a Thursday, May 3rd budget work session. So we're basically alternating Thursdays. And then the final date I'll point out is Monday, May 7th, which is Ward 5 night.
Yes.
And additional budget work session and reconciliation. Also, for the record, I've issued what is now an annual mayoral proclamation declaring April 23rd to April 29th Maryland Veg Week. And this is something that a lot of people are interested in and have enjoyed over the last few years, and it's something that a lot of people enjoy participating in, and encourage residents to choose vegetarian foods as a way to help protect their planet, their health, and animals, and to explore the wide variety of vegetarian cuisine offered in our community. We'll now go to public comment period, and this is a chance for anybody who wishes to comment on anything other than the budget, because we're going to have the budget public hearing very shortly. But anything other than the budget, if anybody wants to comment on, please come to the podium, identify yourself, and please. Oh, you're here. I didn't see you. Oh, well, here. Then, wait a minute. Let's back up a second.
Okay, should I sit down?
No. You're here for the proclamation.
I am. And, well,
Go ahead. Say something first.
for the record, my name is Erica Meyer, and I work here in Tacoma Park at Compassion Over Killing. And I, of course, again, am so honored to have this proclamation signed. And I believe Jesse Carpenter has signed up for our pledge for the week, so we're excited about that as well, and any other council members that want to sign in. Are you taking the pledge this year, Mayor Williams? Not to put you on the spot?
I'm considering it.
Okay. I'll follow up with you.
Exactly what is the pledge?
I'm sorry?
Exactly what is the pledge?
It's a 7-day pledge to go veg for the week, so choosing meatless meals from the 29th from the 23rd to the 29th.
Okay. I can sign up for that.
USVegWeek.com, you can sign up there, or you can contact me, USVegWeek.com.
I can take that pledge.
Yeah? Excellent. We'd love to feature you on our website as a participant.
I
Fantastic.
can't let him do it, and I don't do it. Sign me up.
Excellent. Woo!
Anybody else? Anybody else?
I can't let the council member from Ward 4 do it. I'll do it too.
Excellent.
That includes
All right.
Oh, there's another one.
But it's
We now
not
have
vegan.
4?
We're not talking vegan, right?
We're talking
We're
meatless meals for the week.
vegetarian. Cool.
You can go vegan if you'd like, but it's
No,
meatless
not
meals
yet.
for the week. That's what we're encouraging.
no swallowing goldfish.
We're up to 4 now. Do we have any more? 4? Going for 5?
Going once,
There's smiles?
going twice.
Okay.
James, that's for Senator Raskin is doing it, and so is Delegate Hucker, as well as
And Councilmember Irvin.
Irvin is doing it as well. Yeah.
I'll bite the bait.
All right.
Okay,
Fantastic.
We're up to 5.
Excellent.
All right.
Okay, so,
So,
well, that was my speech. Thank you.
good. And here's the proclamation.
Is it all right if a vegan takes it?
Yes.
Still heat.
Get around here. You gotta get sealed.
Yeah, this okay. Say vegan.
Broccoli with no butter.
Sorry, I'm not. Yes, I think we got it. I think we got it.
The wheels of progress.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Did you want to call on Pat Lovelace? Or it's the typical sequence of events. Is that going to be
You want to
happening?
call him Pat Lovelace?
Should
He doesn't always get to, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Fran Pollner. I live at 510 Philadelphia Avenue. I was here 2 weeks ago in support of a resolution brought by the Maryland Fund Our Communities Bring More Dollars Home Coalition. I came tonight basically to distribute some materials to you, but it's a particularly timely resolution in light of the fact that you're dealing with a city budget for the next, month and a half. I mentioned last time that the city budget was adversely affected last year by a decrease in federal funds. And I noticed that the total revenues are $25.6 million for fiscal 2013. And just by way of comparison, the City of Tacoma Park taxpayers contributed $30 million to the Federal Department of Defense budget last year. It just shows you the skewed priorities of our current allocations in Congress. But I essentially came to give you examples of what other local elected bodies had done with respect to this issue. And there are three of them. There's a little packet for each of you. The first is the General Assembly, led by our representatives, our State Senator Jamie Raskin and Sheila Hickson. The state legislature signed on to a letter asking our congressional delegation for a shifting of federal budget priorities. The City of Greenbelt City Council did the same, except it wrote a letter, and actually the mayor wrote the letter and signed on for all of the council members to each of their representatives. This particular copy is the one to Steny Hoyer, but all of them, and the senators as well, were sent this letter. And the third is what the Baltimore City Council did. It passed a resolution in support of a resolution that was pending before the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which was meeting in Baltimore last year, representing all the major cities in the country. And in fact, they did pass the resolution that the Baltimore City Council urged them to pass, which was kind of a historical one. And that's it. I'll just hand these out to you. Each paperclip contains the three examples. I hope you add your voice. The more vocal voices that are added, the stronger the issue becomes, the more...
Could you go to the microphone?
Sorry. The more our representatives in Congress will act in accordance with the needs of the vast majority of people. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran.
Bruce, may I respond? Ms. Palmer, I would be quite happy to follow the lead of the Greenbelt example and of our state legislators and sign a letter that my council colleagues might wish to join in on. So I will be quite happy to do that and will in the next few days work on that.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful to hear.
Good evening. My name is Priya Murthy, and I am the policy director of an organization called SALT, South Asian Americans Leading Together. SALT is a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose mission is to elevate the voices and perspectives of South Asian individuals and organizations to build a more just and inclusive society in the U.S. I'm proud to say that our organization is located in Tacoma Park. We're located at 6930 Carroll Avenue, right down the street in Old Town Tacoma. And I wanted to share a statement today on behalf of our organization in support of the local resolution against indefinite detention provisions within the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012, or the NDAA, which was enacted by President Obama late last year, and urge the resolution's passage within the City Council. As you may know, provisions within the NDAA would give the President authority to put terrorism suspects found anywhere in the world into indefinite military detention without charge or trial, and based solely on suspicion and not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Since the September 11th attacks, Muslim, Arab, Sikh, and South Asian Americans have lived in a climate where we are often viewed as suspects, simply based on our race, religion, and national origin by the general public and by government agencies. And this has included racial and religious profiling in the context of airports, by immigration authorities, and local law enforcement. And many of you may have heard what's happened with the NYPD and their targeting of Muslim communities in New York, of which our organization and many other local community members are concerned about as well. For the past 10 years, Muslim, Arab, Sikh, and South Asian Americans have been under intense scrutiny for suspected connections to terrorist organizations. And given this climate as a backdrop and the heightened suspicion that is directed towards our communities over the past 10 years, SALT has objected to provisions within the NDAA, as individuals from our communities may be among the first targeted for indefinite detention without adequate due process and constitutional protections. The City of Tacoma Park has the opportunity to stand up against unjust application of congressional authority. This resolution does exactly that through its various provisions, including reaffirming the basic principles of the Constitution, such as the right to due process and a fair trial, instructing public agencies to decline requests from federal agencies acting under detention powers authorized by the NDAA, and expressing the sense of the City Council that Congress should repeal the indefinite detention provisions in question. We urge all of the members of the City Council who adhere to these values within our Constitution to support this resolution. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, what was the name of your organization again?
SALT, South Asian Americans Leading Together.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Lovelace in the back.
Hello, my name's Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. And one thing I wanted to tell you people is I'm really disappointed in the amount of voter turnout we had on the primaries this year. You know, because it seemed like that the weather was good. There was really no excuse for not coming out to vote. Even my friend David Levine, who's in a nursing home, he says to say hi to everybody. Even he got the vote, even though it was absentee. He still was conscientious enough to use his American right and duty to vote. You know, he's in a nursing home and he still was able to vote. So really, if he can do it and I can do it and other people in our situations can do it, there's really no reason for that. And I would like to see at all the festivals and all the events the city puts on, the ward nights, I would like to see a table with the voting registration kits there. And also, we got to remind our people, not only do you have to register to vote, but you've got to get out there and vote. You know, it's not going to do any good if people are not going to register to vote and they're not going to vote. I mean, if we want to keep Tacoma Park as a leader in the peace and justice communities and the environmental issues, we got to at least vote. That's the basic thing, is voting. It's not that hard to do. Only takes a few minutes. And you can also meet nice people while you're out here, maybe go out and get a cup of coffee afterwards. So really, there's no excuse for it. And also, I'd like to see Tacoma Park, as Fran had said and as I had said numerous times before, to support that, fund our communities. Because it's a good time to really think about it now that, like she said, that it's budget time. And also, it'd be one heck of a good way to stand up against these wars that we keep getting involved in, saying no more. We will not put up with it no more. We want to take some of our money back and fund our communities. We need money for alcohol treatment, drug addiction treatment, mental health, you know, regular health care, job training. We need our monies for that. Taking care of our law enforcement. We can't do anything without cash. Nothing operates in this world without the dollar bill. And if we can get some of our money back from that Pentagon, they're just gobbling it all up. They're the biggest, you know, they're like a big pigs eating out of the trough. We got to stop filling the trough. And one way we can do that is support this Fund Our Communities bill. It would be a really good way to do it. Really good way. You know, and if all our friends can vote, everybody should be able to vote. And I got out and voted, everybody got out and voted, we can do it. And I think not only can we just vote, but we can also participate in things that are going on in our neighborhoods. You know, like our festivals and our fairs that are going on in the city. We can always go down there and network and meet people. You know, and please, put out voter registration kits at these different events, including the ward nights. Thank you for letting me share, and support the Fund Our Communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hello. My name is Polly Kamazaki, and I live on Manor Circle in Ward 3. And I'd like to piggyback on what Fran and Pat Lovelace have both mentioned. And I'm so proud to be a resident of Tacoma Park, but I'm not proud for our money to be going to the war instead of to where it's really needed. Our children, our community, mental health, so many other places we could use the money. And the future of all of us depends on it. So please sign this.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hello, Mary Rooker, 804 Larch Avenue, Ward 2. I'm happy to tell you I am not here to talk about sidewalks. I'm also not here to talk about the Veg Week, although I strongly support it. I know Senator Raskin, I think he started it a year or 2 years ago, and like everybody who's done it, he's noticed great health improvements, and he's loved it, and he's never looked back. So whether you do or not, I just want to thank you for giving a whirl and encourage you to expand your taste buds and enjoy some yummy dishes while you're at it. I'm actually here to talk, though, about the Bring the War Dollars Home, the reprioritizing the budget resolution. We've already had eloquent speakers, and I know you've got budget stuff ahead tonight, and I'm going to be very brief. Just want to say, you know, if we could change things around at the federal level, it would help at the state level and the county level. And here in Tacoma Park, it would help you think how much easier, if we had a different federal budget, think how much easier your job tonight would be with our budget here. So I encourage you to consider that. If not for us, then for yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay. We will move to council comments. Councilmember Grimes.
Guess I was quick on the button there. Thank you. So a few announcements, some of which I've been asked to make. One is that there will be a Golden Oldies dance this Friday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church Gym. And this is organized in part by Caroline Alderson, who's an inveterate dancer, among other things. So that's this Friday evening from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church Gym. If you need further information on that, I'd be happy to provide you contact information. Secondly, on Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. at Bell Ziegler Park, former Jecky Park, there'll be a dedication of a carved bench by sculptor Jim Calder with the Tacoma Park Community Band in attendance playing. Sounds like a fun little event. Third, there's another in the series of senior issues meetings this Thursday morning here in the Community Center at 9:30 p.m., organized by resident Wolfgang Mergner. This one will focus on home care and daycare. And then finally, the Friends of the Voice fundraiser is scheduled for this Saturday evening. I heartily endorse that, although I won't be able to make it myself. There's information on the Tacoma Voice website at tacomavoice.com. Moving on quickly, I have brought to the council 2 resolutions. I have given out printed copies to the people on the dais, and I have posted and electronic copies on the TacomaJunction.org website. I took the liberty of doing that. They address issues in Tacoma Junction. They are draft proposed resolutions that I hope that the council can schedule and discuss. They would implement recommendations of the Tacoma Junction Task Force that would address needs that have come up in the task force's research in the community. There are extensive series of outreach meetings. Further, they are supported by petitions that residents have raised. One of them is regarding a Tacoma Junction crosswalk that would extend from Grant Avenue across to the city-owned lot, and optimization of the pedestrian and traffic signals. These are issues that will improve pedestrian safety in Tacoma Junction. We've taken good steps in that direction by engaging a new crossing guard for the school hours. But one thing that parents who, well, I should say residents who came and advocated for the new crossing guard expressed, in addition to the outreach, as I said, of the Tacoma Junction Task Force, was the need for a direct crosswalk. Second resolution in draft, oh, by the way, that one is co-introduced by Council Members Mail and Daniels-Cohen with me. We are the council members who are closest to the Tacoma Junction area. The second one would address streetscaping, extension of the Carroll Avenue streetscaping past the fire station in direction of the co-op in front of the Tacoma Auto Shop, Johnny's more commonly known as, and Healy Surgeons. There was a petition that was introduced by a number of residents about how bad that sidewalk is along there. We want to see that improved, as well as aesthetic improvements, namely streetscaping. And then additionally, there's a need to address the sidewalk, which it hardly deserves that name, that is on Columbia Avenue behind the TPSS co-op and the lot. It's basically some asphalt that's very irregularly laid down, and it would be great to address that. So I have put together a resolution in consultation with a number of people. In this case, there wasn't time to request that the other two council members join in on this one. If you'd like to, that would be great. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. Okay. I don't have announcements, but I have lots of gold stars. And I'm so sorry. I'm saving the gold stars for my ride-along for next week, because I had the opportunity to go on a ride-along last Friday night. It was a real thrill, but I'm saving that one for next week. I just so little time and so many gold stars. Huge gold stars first to our beautiful and heavily flowered city surrounding us. I sometimes think we really take it too much for granted. Now's the time to stop and smell the azaleas. And I know they don't smell, but it really is time to take a moment to take a look about the whole city. I was hoping for cooler days and nights so that the beautiful azaleas and almost every other kind of flowering plant and tree would stay with us longer. I actually have a friend who drove through Tacoma Park last week, and she said, she called me to tell me what a beautiful city it was. We both went, who knew? She had no idea, and she said it's just a fabulous place. And I told her it isn't called Azalea City for nothing. So that was pretty interesting. Second set of gold stars. April is Poetry Month. I'm sorry, police. Poetry Month trumped the ride-along. Gold stars go to the Friends of the Tacoma Park Maryland Library for an excellent turnout of favorite poem evening. 26 people read a favorite poem at the library's 13th annual favorite poem evening on Tuesday, April the 10th. Another 20 people came to listen to the poems and enjoy the refreshments and conversation afterwards. Tacoma Park poet Merrill Leffler, who is also a Ward 3 resident, concluded the readings with a section by former U.S. Poet Laureate Reed Whitmore, deceased. Also, please see all the poems that, like the beautiful flowers, have sprung up all over the whole city. It is a moment to stop, not only and smell the azaleas, but read the very meaningful poems. They're very beautiful, and it's all done by hand very well. It's a cooperative with, I think, Montgomery College, plus some other Ward 3 residents. So, into the crossing guard. As promised, I went up to the junction to see the crossing guard in action. She is indeed very experienced because I recognized her from Holly in Philadelphia and from the Citizen Police Academy. She is bold and fearless as she marches out into the middle of the intersection, making sure all the cars are stopped for the pedestrians. She even stared down, I'm telling you, she stared down a Metro bus. She put her hand up, he was going to go. She put her hand up again, and he got it. He wasn't going any place. So I saw the driver begin to move forward and then thought better of it. Very impressive. huge gold stars to her for her courage and a professional, and a huge thank you to Chief Rakucci for actually putting her up at the junction. I love it when a plan comes together. And also, a warm welcome to Roz Grigsby, a great new member of the Housing and Community Development Department. She will be a wonderful addition to the city staff. Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple things. I wanted to encourage Ward 5 residents to plan to come on May 7th, which is Ward 5 night. It's the opportunity to come and talk about issues that concern Ward 5 and meet and greet the council. We have a little reception ahead of time. Free cookies, as they say. We might come up with some additional things. We're working on that. The second thing I want to urge residents of Ward 5 or elsewhere in the city is to contact. We had an incident of some shots fired in the ward, and it's important to get these things resolved. And one really good way is for residents to report anything they see. Because these things move very quickly. Residents, if they see something, they can report it to the police. It can be done anonymously. And I urge the residents to do that. Thank you.
Okay, and I just wanted to note a couple things. First, remind my colleagues that this Wednesday night, and it's Wednesday night, not Thursday night, because we have a budget work session on Thursday night, there's the Maryland Municipal League Montgomery chapter meeting in Poolsville, and anybody wants to carpool, let me know.
Yes.
We'll be talking about a number of things. And then to note two things that are coming up on Saturday the 28th, and I don't know if the chief is going to want to talk about these, but I'll just mention them that on Saturday the 28th, there are two community events. The first one is Gear Up Tacoma, and this is a chance for everybody to come bring their bicycles, scooters, and skateboards to ride through safety obstacle courses and a crosswalk simulation activity. And there's also going to be bicycle maintenance workshop, car seat workshop, helmet fitting, a raffle for several helmets and refreshments, and a donation site for any unused or unwanted bicycle and bicycle parts, which will be donated to less fortunate areas in other countries. Saturday, April 28th, from 10 to 2 here at the community center in the rear parking lot. And also at the same time, there's going to be the Prescription Drug Take-Back Day, and that's an opportunity for people to bring in expired or unneeded prescription drugs, and they will be disposed of safely. I don't see any other council comments. We'll move to the city manager's comments.
Just a couple items. I had mentioned previously to the council that the GO committee of the county council would be meeting this Thursday morning. That meeting has been changed to April 30th at the same time. And one of the topics of discussion at the GO committee will be municipal tax duplication. The only other comment I would just add is that we're all still trying to sort out what's going on with the state budget. Obviously, the state legislature adjourned without having a budget in hand. You may have heard about the doomsday budget scenario, as they're calling it, which is what happens if the state legislature does not have a budget in place by July 1st. I think that's obviously highly unlikely, but in the event that were to occur, one of the things that would be impacting us would be the state police protection aid. My understanding, and I'm trying to confirm this with MML, is that basically that funding source would go away. Once again, I don't think that is likely to happen. There's obviously talk about a special session. Some of the other issues that we'll obviously need to continue to watch is what's going on with the state and the teacher pensions. It does appear that there may be some turning back to the counties of that financial liability. My guess is Montgomery County did not factor that into their budget plans. So clearly, if they end up having to pick up the cost or any portion of the cost of teacher pensions in FY13, that could potentially have an impact on the city, because it all tends to roll downhill. And the other issue that we'll need to continue to watch relative to the state budget is the maintenance of effort for school funding. And right now, I think that the mayor and I talked about this just prior to the meeting. I think our collective understanding is that if a county fails to budget for the maintenance of effort for schools, the state would essentially take whatever money they were shorted that would otherwise go to the county and pay it directly to the school systems. So lots of things going on, I think, with the state budget that may impact the county budget, that ultimately may impact us. So I think we'll all just have to sort of stay tuned and be vigilant as we go through this budget process.
And if I can just add that one interesting twist to the whole thing was that late Friday, they realized that, in fact, the state legislature had not adjourned with a balanced budget as they're constitutionally required to do. They, in fact, are short about $70 million of having a balanced budget, and that will force them back into a special session, or it will cause the Board of Public Works to do whatever is needed to get the state budget in balance. And for those who don't remember, the original source of all of our problems with reduced state funding for municipalities for highway user revenues and police aid happened in August of 2009, and the cuts were made by the Board of Public Works.
That is correct. The only other things I would just note is at your places at the dais this evening was some supplemental information regarding the police department budget. Not necessarily on point for the budget, but there were two pieces of information that council members had previously asked for. One was an organizational chart, and what we have provided you is what the organizational chart would look like as of July 1st if the changes reflected in my proposed budget are ultimately adopted by the council. I believe it may have been Councilmember Grimes had also expressed some interest in getting information about gunshot detection and location systems. And then relative to the general government department budget, we gave you a little bit more information about the duties of the proposed management assistant position.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for the city manager? Okay, then we'll move on to adoption of minutes. We have one set of minutes for February 27th. Would somebody like to move approval?
Move. Second.
Been moved by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Siemens. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are adopted. We will now, I think we've had our legislative update, basically. So we will move to the public hearing, and this is the first of two city hearings on the city manager's proposed FY13 budget, and as I mentioned previously, the second one will take place 2 weeks from tonight on April 30th. So this is a chance to comment kind of at the beginning of the process and then later on in the process. And of course, anybody is also welcome to come to any city council meeting or budget work session and comment during public comments at the beginning when we're not having a public hearing. So we have a sign-up sheet, and it looks like we've got a few names on it. And if you didn't sign up but want to testify at the budget public hearing, we'll take you after we go to the people who have signed up on the list. And the two people who have signed up are Jennifer Wofford and Corey Thompson. So,
Hi.
And you can have your separate times. You can do together whatever you wish.
I'm Jen Wofford. I live on Carroll Avenue in Ward 3.
I'm Corey Thompson. I live on Carroll as well, but Ward 2.
So we just wanted to say thank you so much to the council for putting money in for the World Festival, and just to say that we look forward to we've had lots of conversations today and look forward to trying to figure out how it might work best. The thing that ultimately we're interested in, just to remind the council of what our real agenda is not so much accomplishing a particular event as it is building bridges, and multiracial, multicultural community building is what we're really after, and however that best works out, we look forward to working it out with you all to figure out what that would look like.
And I'm here to echo what she's just said and to acknowledge that Tacoma Park is a wonderful city to live in, and it needs more bridges built. And I'm here representing in honor of my son, Ian Thompson. He passed May 10th of a dilated cardiomyopathy that we knew nothing about. But he was a bridge to this community, and he exemplified what Tacoma Park was for me. When I saw the outpouring of love and support that came from everyone, and some of you may also know Amy Polk as well. And Amy and Ian were of the same spirit. And who knows Amy will know my son. And my son's name will go on through programs like this one, and that's why I'm here, in his memory, and he loved orange. So I'm here. Didn't know that the sign in Tacoma Park had so much orange and blue in it, and those are his favorite colors. And that's why I'm here, to echo what Jenna said.
And we have
There
orange
we go.
sheets as well.
That's all I could say, but thank you.
How old is your son?
He would have been 8 years old this year.
We're terribly
9 years old this year, sorry. He would have been 8 last year.
we're terribly sorry for the loss of your
Oh,
son.
yeah.
Thank you.
And our group is meeting tomorrow night at the Essex House, where 4 African-American women, 3 white women, 2 African-American men, 2 white men, African, et cetera. Oh, we're out of time?
Nope.
30 seconds.
Got
Oh,
more.
So, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Anybody else
Corey Thompson. Corey Thompson.
wish to testify at the budget public hearing? All right. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And just a reminder again, we're happy to hear from anybody anytime about the budget. And the second budget public hearing and the constant yield public hearing will be in 2 weeks, Monday, April 30th. We will now move to the budget work session. And first up is the police department budget.
I was just going to make some opening comments and then
Sure.
turn it over to Chief Ricucci. As the council probably noted in both the agenda materials as well as in your budget binders, the police department budget is up nominally. It's 0.9%, which represents about an increase of $56,000. There are 2 primary reasons for the increase in the departmental budget. One is higher gasoline cost, which account for about $23,000 of that roughly $56,000. And the other is increased cost for overtime, which is roughly $24,000. Probably more than any other budget in the city, the police department operating budget is about people. As you may have noted, 92% of their budget is personnel related, so that's most of their cost. There was an email inquiry I had gotten over the weekend from Councilmember Mayle, and just would take this opportunity just to clarify. There are other police-related expenses that are accounted for in the speed camera fund. What we are talking about tonight is strictly the operating budget that is accounted for in the general fund. The speed camera fund will be discussed by the council on Thursday evening. What I wanted to do, there were 2 specific issues, actually 3 issues. I think one I'm probably springing on the chief, but I know he can handle it, that I thought might be helpful. One is to talk about the proposed increase in full-time equivalents. It's a very nominal increase, but it's 0.10, which has to do with creating a substitute crossing guard position. As you may have read, just going through the materials, there is a proposed reorganization plan that would go into effect July 1st, and I'd like the chief to maybe talk about that a little bit and the reason for that restructuring. And then the third increase had to do with overtime and to maybe give the council a sense of what drives some of those overtime costs.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce my staff that's here tonight to help me answer some of these questions if we get a lot. Behind me is Captain Ed Corsi, Lieutenant Richard Bowers, who's currently attending the Northwestern Command School, Acting Lieutenant Dan Frischkorn, who is our Acting Patrol Commander, and beside him is Lieutenant Tyrone Collington, who's in charge of our CID. And then my executive assistant and our PIO, I think everyone knows Kathy Plevy, who's also here tonight. Our budget is mostly personnel costs, as Ms. Matthews has said, and there's been very little change over the last couple of years other than the personnel costs that come with the new contracts and the union things. There are 3 areas that we want to discuss tonight. I'll start with the crossing guard. One of the things that we've learned is even having the crossing guards we have, we run into problems, and this year was one of those cases where we had a crossing guard out since January 1st on an injury that occurred last year. By having a substitute guard, this guard would at least be guaranteed 4 hours a month so we could keep them up to date on what's going on. But we'd have somebody to fill in when we have vacancies, they're on leave, sick leave, things like that, and you say, well, why is that? Well, when we don't have a crossing guard, we have these options. We can take one of the officers off the street to do the crossings. Most crossings run about an hour and a half to 2 hours. In other words, there's 3-hour crossings and 4-hour crossings. Our administrative clerks who are trained, cross-trained basically, so they can fill in, means they leave their desks from a lot of the administrative duties that help deal with the public every day, from parking to payroll and many of the other issues we deal with. The biggest problem is our parking enforcement officer has been off the street for 3 hours a day now since January 1st. So you can imagine that has affected some of our proceeds from parking enforcement that we have to do, because he's filling in for one of our guards right now. This position would allow us to have a substitute guard to fill in when people are not there, sickness and leave and things that occur, and it would be a much more cost-effective method. The second one is overtime. In the past, I think we were under budget based on our statistics. One of the things Ms. Matthews asked me to do 3 years ago was look at the statistics, and we've been keeping them over the last 3 years to see where our overtime is. And where we spend the most money now is court overtime. You make more arrests, you write more tickets, you go to court more. You go to court, there's a minimum of 3 hours when they show up at court when they're off duty, which they get 3 hours based on union contract. You do not reduce crime without putting more hours into crime reduction. Our success over the last 5 years in reducing crime has resulted in more court time, and that is one of the reasons we've asked for an increase. Patrol staffing shortages also impacts us. We have minimum staffing for patrol. When we don't meet it, we bring in officers on overtime because we believe we owe the community to continually put the amount of officers to meet the concerns of our community on the street every night. You say, why is that? Well, we've had police shootings, especially over the last 2 years, which has resulted in 6 officers being off for considerable periods of times in the last 14 months, which we had to backfill. I might add these shootings, in my opinion, and have already, with the exception of one shooting, have been cleared by courts, were very good shootings, but there's a process. There's a grand jury investigation, there's a criminal investigation, there's an internal affairs investigation. The 2 officers that were involved in the December 2011 Sunoco shooting are still off today because of grand jury investigation still going on. It's a very slow process. This time we have no control over it because it's in Prince George's County. We think there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and we've been able to get some forensic reports which may speed the process up, I hope, in the next few weeks. Also, we have the normal job-related. We get people injured. They step off a curb, sprain an ankle, they hurt a back. They may be off a week here, 2 weeks there, where we have to backfill. There's family medical leave. People need to be off to deal with those type of things, which is standard. In a big department, you have extra bodies that you can float around. In a municipal department, a small department like ours, there are no extra people sitting on the sidelines that you can bring in and move around. We are very good at, as I call it, moving the Ouija board to put people so we can meet the needs of the community, but there are times when we're short, and that's when we have to pay overtime. As I've said, our department's success has been based on full staffing. When there are shortages, we must utilize overtime. This budget should address that need based on what our statistics were over the last 3 years. The money that's been put in the budget by the City Manager Matthews should address that. The final thing in staffing and on the new organizational chart, upon Captain Corsi's retirement effective July 1st, I will eliminate the captain's position and put a lieutenant's position in administrative services. That position, basically, since we eliminated that position 2 years ago when we had to cut back on positions, Captain Corsi's been filling in, running that division along with his normal duties. By dividing up the duties between the 3 lieutenants, I feel we can operate the department without a captain and have a good staffing. It has been tough running administrative services with the captain when we eliminated that position. We knew we were going to have to divvy it up, and we have divvied it up. By now putting a lieutenant over it, it'll be divided equally, the workload, which will obviously relieve the 2 lieutenants who I would commend. Lieutenant Collington and Lieutenant Bowers have had a lot on their plates the last couple years as a result of eliminating some of the positions, which I think will improve our effectiveness in delivering the service that our community expects. Also, in the budget is a new position which we will discuss on Thursday night when we do the speed camera budget. I'll be open for questions from me or my staff at this point.
Questions? Councilmember Mayo.
Yeah, Chief, a question for either you or the city manager. In terms of your retirement and then the expected process for refilling that position, have we budgeted or do we need to budget either for higher or lower expected expenses for the chief position?
We had already had the budget in fairly far along by the time the chief made his announcement. We'll go back and review that. The major impact Councilmember Mayo has been, as I think I mentioned to the council a couple weeks ago, is I have included both in the projections for FY12 as well as the request for FY13 funding for an executive search firm to assist me in that process. I'm estimating the cost to be in the neighborhood of $20,000. And I've got about half of that being spent in the human resources budget in FY12 and the balance of it being accounted for in FY13.
Other questions? I've got a few. First, my compliments on a lot that you've been doing really well. The reduction in crime over the last few years, the better cross-jurisdiction cooperation and communication, and the better communication with the community. I think all of those have really been an outstanding effort on behalf of the whole department, and I think everybody sees the results. One thing that I wanted to follow up on page 47 in the budget, you talk about under management objectives, improving patrol service by using directed patrol based on crime analysis. And what that brought to mind was some of the things that I've been seeing lately on efforts that departments around the country have been using to do that. And assuming that it's the same thing that other departments are talking about, my sense from that is that it can get the police there in kind of being able to understand where crime is likely to occur and being more likely to be able to show up or already be in the vicinity of something happening. And if that's the case, it essentially can put the officers in more danger because they're in the middle of an unfolding situation. And I was wondering if that's what you're talking about there, and if it is, what you've thought about it, of ways to kind of ameliorate some of those potential dangers to the department.
Well, to answer your first question, it's a part of our crime analysis program, what we've been doing since we brought the position in year 2. Our crime analysts have gotten better trained. We do a lot of work with the state. Our crime analyst now, Andrew Gucciardo, I think all of you've met before, and through his CompStat. He is recognized through the area for his work, and he's went to a lot of things throughout the country. We've been invited to attend at their expense. And one of the things we're doing is what we call predictive policing, which is what this objective is about. It's where you look at the crime stats, and you can almost, and it's working elsewhere, and it's working here too. You look at your crime stats, you look at the calls for service, time of day, and you can almost predict what area it's going to be in and when it's going to occur. Obviously, officer safety is always a concern. I'm glad you brought it up because I read something today, and I've been emphasizing with the officers. There have been more officers killed by firearms in the last 2 years. Fortunately, we're off to a bad start again this year. It's almost half, and we're only through April. We had a police chief killed last week. We had an officer in Austin, Texas, killed last week. The chief was a few days from retirement, which obviously makes me think a little bit, but there's a concern out there. Is it more dangerous? Yes. Are there more guns on the street? Yes. One of the things I've been pleased with, our management staff that sits behind me has worked very hard on training for officers, officer safety, both in defensive tactics and shooting, live shooting. We're doing more training than we've ever done before in this department, and we'll continue to do that. These command staff is committed to giving our officers every tool. As the chief of police, I think it's my responsibility to provide the tools and equipment and training from the money you give us in the budget to well-train our officers. So, yes, there is a bigger danger when you know you're in an area. There's a bigger danger out there today. For some reason, although it goes in cycles, after being in this business as long as I have, Seems like people are taking pot shots and shooting now at officers more than they've ever had since back in the early 70s when we were having assassinations and things like that. It's dangerous out there, and I'm not going to tell you it isn't. That's why we spend a lot of time on officer safety. I emphasize it every week in my newsletter to our officers, the officer safety issues, and we go over some of the cases that are occurring throughout the metropolitan area and through the nation. But it is more dangerous. You are correct, Mayor, and we are addressing it.
Good. What's the timing for the radio conversion?
You want to give the most update, Rick? Okay.
Because I know we've been planning on purchasing equipment, and it's like, okay, we must be getting close.
The situation we're on with the radio upgrades is the county has already purchased the new portable mobile field units. They're in the process of upgrading the infrastructure. We're not anticipating that to come online for 2 more years. So we are slowly purchasing the field equipment, and in 2 years we should have enough money in the capital improvements budget to clean out the rest of what we need.
Okay. I wasn't sure whether it was coming sooner than that.
Yeah, I believe it's all in the speed camera fund.
Yeah, okay. I just wasn't sure.
2014 is when we expect everything to be purchased at that point.
But we're rolling, we're ready.
Oh, yeah, we're buying the portables. We should have that all done this year, right? 2 years.
Councilmember Snipper has a
Very-
follow-up.
Very quick follow-up. There isn't going to be any issue because of this 2-year period? You're not going to have any, okay.
That was our concern also, as you may guess, and it's a transition, so we can continue to use the old ones till we get to the new one.
Okay. And then a question that I've got, and if you reference both pages 45 and 47 in the budget. Oh, and by the way, I just want to say thank you for providing page numbers. I think that's a first.
You can thank our finance budget specialist, Daisy Ling. The credit goes to Daisy.
Because every year before this, it's always been, gee, what
Okay, so
page?
third,
find
yeah, oh my God.
So having page numbers, even though they're on a portrait orientation and the pages are on a landscape orientation, it doesn't matter. We've got page numbers. Thank you. I'm looking at the performance workload measures on both pages, and I can't quite have them make sense one to the other. And looking at the number of calls for service dispatched on page 45, and then the number of calls for service handled on page 47. And I'm assuming those are a little different. However, the calendar 2011 figures are exactly the same, and the trend on the one is kind of up and on the other one down, and so I'm trying to figure out whether there's any reason that they should make any sense, or what's going on with those figures.
The basic difference, and I'm taking a minute to look at the numbers themselves, is the one figure, the larger figure includes officer-initiated calls, things that are...
Because they're the larger ones, so that it's what's dispatched and what isn't dispatched. Okay, but for calendar 2011, both numbers are exactly the same.
Okay, we'll have to take a look at those to make sure they're correct.
There's something fishy with the numbers.
We'll take a look at them, make sure they're correct.
We'll get back to you that on Thursday.
Okay. Councilmember Snipper.
No, I just had a very quick reaction. I really can't stress how strongly I feel about safety being priority here, and that whatever training you need to help your officers be safe, I'm very supportive of, whatever it takes.
Well, the budget you've given us you haven't heard me complain. We have what we need to do the job. Obviously, I want to keep what we've got in there.
Right.
And I think if you budget realistically and you have a city manager like Ms. Matthews that makes sure every number meets our thing, which I'll be paying for the one number that's wrong tonight, no, we've had a good budget. I'm not going to say, and we'll get to it Thursday, the speed camera fund has obviously helped us immensely here in the city. You know how much stuff you all have been able to do and we've been able to do, and it's not about the money, because I can't say enough for the results we've had from our speed cameras and how safer the city is tonight for it. But
I just want the officers to be safe as well.
Well, that's my number one thing. It's my number one goal. I go to bed every night hoping that everything's goes right. When you get that phone call 3 o'clock in the morning, you look at it, I'm always worried about that. And we've been very fortunate, and I think it's because we have trained well. These folks behind me have done an excellent job in training these officers. I think in going back to the Montgomery County Recruit Academy, which we did several years ago, has paid off immensely because our officers are well-trained and in tune with the county. The interjurisdictional cooperation, we train with the county now. We use their facilities, and that makes a big difference. We weren't doing that 5 years ago. So I think tonight I could say we're in a better spot than we were 5 years ago, and I know in the future with these people behind us, we will continue that, that possession to keep our people trained.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
I wanted to go back to the beginning where you're talking about your overtime, back on the page 40 where the departmental summary is where you're referring to is that the overtime line adopted in FY12 was $244,500 and proposed for FY13 is $268. Is that the right number?
That's correct.
Is that what you're looking at?
Yes.
Then when overtime accumulates, does that also not affect fringe benefits as well?
Yes, it does.
So that would go up in proportion to some degree.
To some degree, kind of as a reminder, and I think I mentioned this a month or so ago, is those officers hired since 1986 are required by federal law to participate in Medicare. Those who were hired before that time are not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to necessarily be the same situation, Councilmember Schultz, for every single employee. It is going to vary somewhat depending on their hire date in terms of Medicare cost.
But we pay Social Security.
We do not for police for sworn police officers.
For sworn police officers. Okay. That's different. What is the meaning of night differential? Just
when they work the night shift, which is from 7 at night to 7 in the morning or 8 at night to 8 in the morning, they get a night differential.
Okay. This is what, an incentive, or is this just a reward?
It's a part of a negotiated union contract.
Okay.
We were also incurring night differential cost for ASME members who are assigned to the evening shift, which is primarily our custodial staff.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
It's a standard payment in just about every police union contract now.
I assume so. I just wanted to get just a general understanding of what it really meant. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to take a moment to call out Ms. Plevy and say thank you. Your name is well known in the community, and I know that the other officers and staff help, but the information you provide is fantastic, and I get thank yous that I'm passing along to you on behalf of citizens all the time. So that's the first thing. Thank you. The second is that in terms of the pension fund, are our contributions into which I think is a statewide fund, pension fund, are they segregated in some way? How does the structure of that work?
The city actually has two separate pension plans. One is for civilian employees, police civilians and otherwise, which is the state pension plan. We have our own pension plan for sworn police officers. So that actually has its own actuarial valuation that is done. I am trying to remember, Councilmember Mayo, if the last report was given to the former council or to this council, we can certainly provide another copy, but those assets are segregated and accounted for.
Okay. And the statewide fund, are those segregated as well, or are our contributions?
Our contributions are, I don't believe they are. There is a statewide system actuarial valuation that is done for the plan.
Thank you. And one question, one comment. The question is, there's the supplemental material in here about gunshot detection, and I just didn't know if you wanted to comment on that at all, if it's just informational.
Well, I think it speaks for itself.
But since we just got it, we haven't seen it.
I mean, basically, it's a system I'm pretty familiar with because DC's using it. It's been it's worked well there. It's worked well in Newark, New Jersey, Chicago, Illinois. It's a very good system. I think the biggest thing is the cost. And I laid it out there. If somebody told me I had the money to spend it, I would obviously recommend. I mean, it's been more of an issue in the last year. I think the council, the ones that have been here since the beginning with me, would say we didn't have a lot of these calls 5 years ago. It has picked up, as you well know, and we're obviously publicizing because we do want residents to call in. The more that call in, the better chance we have of catching them. It's a good system. As when Councilmember Grimes asked for it, we did some research, and I was familiar with it. I just didn't know what the cost is. There's a big cost. It's a big investment. But I would tell you, it's like the cameras that we researched for the council, I think, 2 years ago. That has a big cost, too. So, I mean, that's a decision as the council you've got to make. I mean, it's a big cost there. Do they work? Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then my last comment is in relation to the December 2011 event. We talked a little bit about crime at gas stations in Tacoma Park and nearby. And I would just be really interested if either now or, in the context of these budget discussions, if there are any expenses that related to signage or any other things to deal with crime specifically around gas stations that would be needed.
The biggest thing that we've spent money on is overtime, putting details in the gas stations, which has paid off. The biggest thing right now is Lieutenant Collington's detectives and there are plainclothes people have been working very closely with D.C., PG County on this issue. It's gone down somewhat. It's not the pattern it was before. Unfortunately, this is a crime that can be prevented if you lock your car and you take your purse with you. I mean, we've had one car where they actually broke in all this that's gone over the last 3 years, I'd say. Now, we have sufficient money. We need to get the owners of the gas stations to come on board. That has not been an easy task here in Tacoma Park, because one owner owns the two stations that cause us the most problem, and he's been the most, and I'll say it public, uncooperative with us.
Here, here.
And what are those stations?
Huh?
What are those stations?
The two in New Hampshire as you go into the D.C. line.
6300 and
the Ready Mart.
The big W.
And the Sunoco.
Okay.
I hang out there.
We've got the manager on site's been very cooperative, and that's worked for us. He's been excellent. We'd like to see the owner do a lot more. They've done what we've asked. We've gotten the signs put up. They do have a camera, which we stay on them, which does help us with pictures. So from that perspective, that part's worked good. I wish the owner would partner with us. We could do a lot more, but I can't make him do what he doesn't want to do. So, but fortunately, the people on staff there, because they've been robbed, so that does give them a little motivation to work with us, and they've worked very well. And I will say the staff there has been excellent on site.
Okay. I just got a follow-up question on the shot detection system. To what extent do you feel comfortable characterizing the kind of your sense of a summary of the types of incidents that we've had over the recent past? Is it just people firing because it's a cool thing to do? Is it gangs? Is it something else?
Well, here's the best explanation. They have it in D.C. because when they get gunshots that go off down there, they have a murder to go with it or several people injured. We haven't had any situations that I can, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, where we've had gunshots fired where we had bodies found to go with it, right? No. I think they're shooting off gun to show off. They may be shooting it to threaten somebody, intimidate somebody that may be inside of an apartment or resident. I think that may be part of it, because we do have a lot of gang activity. The one group that we arrested earlier this year was a gang member, and he did it in several spots here and over in Prince George's County. They don't have a lot of common sense, and they shoot it off, and they realize it does put fear. Just think about if you listen to the calls that come in, how upset people are. If you're in your house and you hear pop, 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 and you know what it is, are they shooting at me? Are they shooting at my neighbor? So it does bring fear. And these guys and gals know it to do it. They're bringing fear into our community. The good news is we don't have bodies like Chicago and Newark and like Washington, D.C. that go with it. It's a great tool down there because they find where the body is, and sometimes they find the shooters within minutes. Hopefully we won't reach that point. We haven't, and I hope we'll continue to keep the city streets safe. But it is a concern, and I think it was a legitimate question. Just like the surveillance cameras, you will hear it periodically from residents, as I do, and I'm sure you do. And you've got the information in front of you. There may be a point in time where you decide you want to get surveillance cameras or to do the gunshots. But that's going to be a big investment on the city's part, as we both know, in these tight times. It's going to be tough.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Williams. I also want to thank you. I sent you my email when you made your announcement of your retirement, but I really want to thank you for being an excellent leader. I had the opportunity to do the ride-along on Friday night, and
I got your email.
Yeah. And I want to underline what Councilmember Snipper said. You don't know when you get out of the car, you have no idea what's happening. The thoughts all went through my mind. We answered several calls, and the police officer was kind and let me come along. So being safe is really important. What I noticed was once the calls came in, between 30 seconds and a minute was how quickly the response was made. And of course, the officer I was with allowed the plainclothes unit to get to the first call first. And then I think there were 3 and maybe 4 other flashy police cars that showed up once the plainclothes officers got there to handle the situation. I invite the rest of the council to experience a ride-along. I'm going to say do it once a year, because it's easy to forget what all that feels like. It's just kind of regrounds you and what the police are about. I always felt pretty safe. After I went with this officer, I really feel safe now. He really knows what he's doing, as I'm sure the rest of your department does as well. Secondly, Kathy Plevy. I mean, what can I say? She's you're the man who brought her in. She's connected the community with all of the police work, because it looks like, there's police officers and there's us, but Kathy's hooked us all up with what goes on, what we need to know, how we need to know it, and that's, anybody that's on a listserv, and that's what's so sad about it. They're not on a computer, they're not getting the information, but it's really a thrill to always have that. The Citizens Police Academy, the Chiefs Advisory Board, the Don't Be a Victim seminar, plus the community police officer. I mean, I know when you first got here, I said, I want the blue eye, and I want it now. And now and he knows what I'm talking about. It's the Neighborhood Watch, and now we have it. The signs and Carla Magne, Officer Magne. So, and I know that I just know a little bit about what's going on. This is just as a citizen, or as a resident, my experience.
Well, I might add that Captain Corsi played a part in picking Kathy with me, too.
Oh, all right.
It's a story we'll tell when I leave here.
Okay.
It's worth hearing.
And of course, there's Captain Corsi, who's been an important and integral member of the emergency preparedness in the city, and I know I see that we're going to hire someone that's a civilian, but he's going to leave, and I've told him, a huge hole in that area, and he's been such a support and so important to the city. I don't think, because he's always behind the scenes, no one, he's quietly behind the scenes, no one really sees him out there, so I appreciate the whole force. Well,
I appreciate that. Just so you know, Ed's here to July 1st, and I'm here to August 1st, and both of us will be working up to our last day, and there won't be any let-up, because this budget is as important to me as it was the first year I was here.
I'm not surprised. I'm sure that's how it's going to be.
Councilmember Schultz.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to get back to this video surveillance, because it's something that I've, as you may know, been interested in for the last couple of years, and I know the city did some research with the city of Hyattsville and all of that, and we haven't really pushed it on our end up here to sort of say this is, we want this in the budget and all that, because we know it's going to be expensive, but it's something that I remain interested in, and I just want to go on the record for that, partly because my ward includes New Hampshire Avenue, University Boulevard, where an awful lot of minor crime occurs, the kind of stuff that just keeps your officers busy. It's not always felonious activities. Is that a right word? Felony type activities?
Felonious, it's a word.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, But it just seems to me that it would be a much more versatile system than a shot spotter system, which is simply serves a simple purpose of tracking down gunshots, whereas a system of surveillance cameras, which we realize can only be directed towards public areas, streets and sidewalks, and not on private property. But I think those, in combination with the units that individual commercial property owners might be interested in putting up as well, would provide us a lot more help in discouraging crime, because once people understand that it's there, I realize that an awful lot of the criminals you can tell them it's there, and they're going to be too dumb to even pay any attention to it.
Well, we're finding business owners, or a lot of them are coming on board getting their own system for their own store. And obviously, the big system that we did research on would impact the entire area, especially the business area down in New Hampshire and University. Along with the cost, there is another issue which in Tacoma Park would be the civil liberties, and there's different ways systems operate. A lot of people have been very pro for it, and I've heard a lot of people that would feel it's Big Brother watching, but that would be a bigger issue, I think, as from some of the issues I've worked through in 5 years here. That would be something you'd have to look at too, because you'd have to first decide what you want and then how you would want the city to operate it. But it's a big thing, it's a good thing, it's worked well, but it is a costly thing, as we learned in Hyattsville.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're going to be retired, and we'll probably be dealing with this question with the future police chief, which is fine, but I do think it's something that would work. I mean, I understand the political issue, value issue, but when you think about it, Montgomery County has its traffic cameras on whatever it is, Channel 6, that go 24 hours a day monitoring probably 50 or 60 different intersections throughout the county, and nobody seems to care a hoot about the fact that somebody might see my car drive through an intersection at a certain time of day. I mean, I just think it's absurd, but that's just my opinion. And that's all I wanted to say on it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh,
Just before you close out the police department budget, I did just want to remind the council that there is a minimal grant that the police department secured. It's Homeland Security funds that's in the special revenue fund. It's only about $7,500. I didn't know if there were any questions about that. And then on page 110, in the capital improvement program, I did just want to note for the council that coming out of the equipment replacement reserve would be funding for patrol cars as well as a replacement administrative vehicle for the Criminal Investigations Division. They're fairly routine purchases, but I did just want to flag those for you in case there were any questions.
and if you can just clarify for everybody for the budget process, should we pay attention to the whatever's in the capital budget for a particular department as we get to each department?
That's what I would suggest. The police department capital is a little bit unique in the sense that it's split among the speed camera fund as well as the equipment replacement reserve, which is a general fund accounting mechanism. And certainly if there's questions about the speed camera fund, those can be addressed Thursday night.
So everybody should remember to take a look at the capital section for each
Yes,
one.
I would suggest so.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
And we'll take a short break and come back for general government, debt service, and non-departmental. And we're moving to the general government budget, which includes the city manager's office, finance, human resources, information systems, the city clerk, and the legislative. And I guess the city manager wants to
I'll just
lead this one.
be very brief. Our budget is, as proposed, is up about 2.6%, or just over $63,000. As you may have noted, the increase comes from the expenditure category known as services and charges. In our case, that's basically contractual cost. Of that, roughly $63,000 of the increase, $40,000 is attributable to the third iteration of the Tacoma Park Resident Survey. Legal costs are up by about $35,000, and the executive search firm services that I mentioned earlier this evening for the police chief search, the portion that would be accounted for in FY13 totals about $10,000. Obviously, that all adds up to a little bit more than $63,000. There are some offsetting decreases in the budget, but that's essentially the primary difference in the general government budget. As we talked about at the end of January, we are proposing a new full-time position for FY13, referred to as a management assistant. The cost of that is shared 50% between the general government department budget, specifically general management, or that's the city manager's office, and the housing and community development department. We passed out this evening, and I apologize, it did not go out with the original agenda packet, but we've tried to highlight some of the essential job functions of the proposed position. And Suzanne, do you want to just kind of briefly talk about this?
Okay. I think in looking at what we are doing in our offices, we were determining that a lot of work that Barb and I and then Sarah in housing were doing were things that somebody with, a lot of common sense and a bachelor's degree and some experience with administrative work could really assist us with and allow us to do some of the more significant work that we'd like to focus on. This kind of work has to do with some just grant administration, assembling the reports related to that, filing things that need to be sent into the various record-keeping entities. We have sometimes meeting with committees or preparing work for committees, for the staff to be presented at committees, implementing some special events that sometimes get involved with some of our projects. For housing and community development, they'll talk about this a little bit, but assisting with some of the cultural programming work that they do to get the folks here in this facility or for some of their arts around this community. Assisting with the resident survey in terms of taking the results and helping it make sure that if there are improvements that need to be focused in different departments, that those are highlighted and followed up on. There's some research kind of work that could be done and some work on policies and procedures. I know when I go into my office, I see lots of things that somebody else could do and I'm not getting done, or I see that I'm spending some time on some things that somebody else really could do, and I could be more responsive to you and to the community. When we looked at this, we didn't think it needed full-time in the city manager's office, but we certainly could use some regular assistance. And so if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions? Yes. Councilmember Stepper.
I greatly support this. I can easily imagine a full-time person. And then I have a question that's off topic. Am I allowed to do that?
I want to make sure if we had anything on that in particular. Okay. Then we'll move along. Yes.
This is on the, can I ask the city manager a question about the special revenue funds? Because it was in our public hearing part. And it concerns the fund balance for the special revenue funds.
This is general government?
No, it's not, but since it came with the public hearing materials, I didn't get to ask it then.
No, you're out of order.
Well, I asked you how far out.
Well, I didn't know you were going that far. No.
Okay, is that too far?
General government.
All right. I'll save it for later.
Good. Okay. Councilmember Schultz.
I just want to say that really glad to see that this position is being proposed. I think it's become very evident that it's something that's really needed, just in terms of giving the current existing staff the flexibility that they need at the level of work that they do in order to function much more efficiently, focus their talents and professional experience on stuff that really requires that level of attention, and to be able to delegate some of this stuff that you've just described to a slightly lower level person. I think it's just going to make everybody's improve everybody's sanity a little bit, and that's got to be to the good. So I'm glad to see it.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions. One first comment. In terms of the resident survey, I'm supportive of the budget item for that, but I just really want to make sure that we have a moment in future council meetings to talk about the questions that are asked. I think that's an important thing to make sure we get real value out of the survey. I note in here that you talk about, or you have goals for number of payroll checks direct deposited. I'm assuming that direct deposit creates a savings for the city.
It does. I'd probably look to Yvonne if there's any specifics that you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious how we get to, if it creates a savings, how we get to 100% or a whole lot closer to it.
Well, starting October 1st, we have mandatory direct deposit. Employees previously hired, we cannot force them to have direct deposit.
Okay. So over time, with retirements, we'll see it rise to 100%.
Yeah, and it is a time saving as far as, paper and toner and things like that.
Sure, yep. And then a question on if any additional money in IT or contract costs associated with the city's website, and I imagine this is an issue that's been covered in other previous council sessions, but if there's anything we can do I'm thinking about very basic things that we've identified needs for, such as having last year's final budget put up on the website. I know sometimes it's staff being able to get information to the website administrator, but that's an area where I hear a lot of feedback from residents, and if we need additional money, $10,000, $5,000, whatever it would take to get the website up to speed, I think that would be a priority for me.
Yeah, Suzanne will be getting some information out to the council later this week about the status of the website, but
we have put some money.
We have put some money in next year's budget for that.
Yeah.
And that'll be covered in the communications budget session next Monday.
Okay, thank you.
I've got two questions about general government. One is a specific one about, there's mention in the IT budget about the software packages supported by the city, and I was just wondering what those are. And I see Mr. Castillo here, and I'm sure he knows the answer off the top of his head. He's not looking so sure.
Well, I could name them all,
The ones that we recognize.
Okay. Well, we have email, which is group-wise. Word processing, we pay maintenance on. The financial package, which does our payroll.
Right, but what particular ones? Like Microsoft Office, and we do support that. We don't support WordPerfect, or where are we on all this?
We're in Office 2010 shop, and we have on-site license for that. Yeah, we pay maintenance on that. We also pay maintenance on software for internet, content management, content monitoring, spam, virus protection. Put me on the spot. That's a short list.
Okay.
The real long, our biggest cost is on financial software, because there's several packages there. Is
that still Pendimation, or is that something different now?
Say again?
Pendimation or something?
Yeah, it's called SunGuard. SunGuard Public Sector is their new name. Okay.
So they changed their name, but not the product.
Right. They just bought out more companies, and they expanded. Yeah. They're now also they offer public safety software also. which they did in the past.
And then also all the Granicus pieces.
The media streaming?
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we're happy with all of the pieces that we're using?
I'm not the primary user, but I'll defer to those that use Granicus, yeah.
Well, I mean, any of them.
Yeah, for the most-
Do we contemplate needing to change anything? We're happy with where we are, we're just,
Well, we could do a survey, but right now, we're happy with what we have. And we usually make changes to adapt to what our staff is asking. For a while, we were not going to Microsoft because we were a WordPerfect shop for a long time.
Right.
And as that's been happening, we've been changing. And now we support Microsoft, the Office products.
just because I remember it wasn't that many years ago when we didn't have an IT budget of any kind. We didn't budget for computers or software or support. We didn't have people. We just kind of went by the seat of the...
long time ago.
It wasn't that long ago when we went kind of seat of the pants.
And your computer had a crank on the side.
Now the cranks are in front of the keyboard.
Yeah. No, the cranks are at the dais.
Same place.
We've come a long ways.
Yeah, we have. And then my other question is about, maybe it's probably for the city manager, and it's about human resources, and I'm just wondering about the timeline for filling the 2 vacant positions, and are there any anticipated changes in how things work, given that it's the complete changeover in the department?
I have an ad out for the HR director position. I don't know if you were aware, there's lots of HR people got caught up in the economic downturn, so probably when we posted it on Craigslist, among other places, literally within the first hour, I think we already had 10 resumes. I think it now stands at about 150 and still counting. So I'll be doing a first review of those on April 30th. My intention is to get that process pretty far along before I advertise for the HR specialist or the assistant position, because I do think the new director, whoever that should be, what I'm hoping to do is once I'm in the interview process is go ahead and advertise for that position. And then once the new director's on board, there'll be at least a group of resumes that he or she will be able to look at. I think in terms of what I see changing, I would like for the department to do a little bit more in the area of providing internal customer support. We're still a little bit of a decentralized personnel operation in terms of helping with employee recruitment. That has not been my experience in some other cities, and I do think the HR department could provide more support, I guess, for departments in terms of at least handling some of the initial applicant screening. That, in my experience, works different ways depending on how the supervisor or the hiring authority wants to handle things. But I do think the department should have a good sense of what a particular department is looking for, be able to help in screening those resumes, help in setting up interviews, sitting in on those interviews to make sure that everything is done, by federal and state law standards. And I think we could do a lot more in terms of employee training.
So what you have in the budget for positions, training, employee recognition, all those kinds of things are sufficient for however things might potentially adjust or change. You're going to have the resources necessary, you'll tweak the positions and get where you want to be?
I believe so. I think as some of you are aware, when I was an assistant city manager many years ago, I also doubled as an HR director and a pension administrator and a whole lot of other hats as you did. This was a city of 250 plus employees, and basically I essentially did Suzanne's job functioning as an HR director and had one person helping me, and we did all those things. So I do think it is doable with a staff of that size. I think it's just a matter of providing some focus and some direction. The other thing, I guess, Mayor, in answer to your question, is we do need to be doing more in the risk management area. Workers' comp has been an area of increasing cost for the city. So one of the things I put in the job announcement is I was looking for someone who had broad-based HR experience as well as risk management experience who could bring that to the table.
Good. Thanks. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I'll just remark first that I have not made any remarks about the police budget or anything, and that's simply because I don't have anything exceptional to say on these points. So I like hearing, I do now, just to affirm that I like hearing about a desire to prioritize customer service. The public are our customers, of course, and that involves responding in an effective way to their requests wherever possible and wherever the funding is available and all of that. And it, of course, also involves keeping them informed. So reliance on public-facing information systems such as the city website, but other ones that process public transactions is very important. And within those systems, as the council has discussed, it's important to focus not only on capabilities, but also usability of the systems. And since Granicus was brought up, that's an outside service that we use. I find the Granicus usability to be poor, but it seems also to be a system that is very widely used among governments. It's become a standard, and well, I would love to see an alternative raised if anyone has time to do any research on that. And then, as the council has raised in the past, there is the issue of accessibility to persons with disabilities of the city's information systems, public-facing and internally used. That's it. Thank you.
Other questions or comments for the general government section? Okay. Go ahead.
And what I was going to suggest is we just walk very briefly through the Special Revenue Fund and the CIP. These will be IT projects, so I'm going to turn it over to Abel. Maybe we could start with the special. Why don't we start with the CIP? It's pages 111 and 112. It starts at the bottom of the page for IT function.
Okay. Well, right off the bat there, in the Special Revenue Fund, we have a fiber connectivity project, and our idea there was to connect Public Works and us with better bandwidth, and to provide, to make Public Works our disaster recovery site or another site where we could have the same capabilities we have here. In addition, with fiber bandwidth, we could do media events over there, or we could do public information events over there. There's a new conference room over there, and that's where all this would go. As part of the fiber connectivity, we currently don't have our own network there. We lease Comcast, we lease Verizon. This would be something that the city would own, and it'd be like a first leg of something the city would own. That's the idea there. That figure was not, I helped come up with the equipment and the electronics at either end of the fiber, but the pricing came from consultants that actually did this room. They said, this is a good figure for the 3 or 4 blocks we have between Public Works and us. So that's why that's there. And part of the funding would be for designing and some of the legwork that would be involved, which I don't have the expertise.
And I heard you saying that we would own it up there, we currently lease it, and I couldn't quite tell from what you said whether that would make it so that we own all of it, both there and here, or whether we have a mixed system here.
We would own both end and in between.
So the whole...
Right. It would be our fiber now.
The whole bone.
Right.
Okay.
We would probably be borrowing pole or telephone pole area, and those are things that need to be worked out and figured out. We own the land that the telephones are on, but we don't own the telephone poles. I think that's how that works.
Could we put telephone poles in?
I guess we could. I don't know how much money we have.
Or we could bury the fiber?
We could bury the fiber. All that, we would want some expert to tell us the best way. There's a couple of ways. We could follow the street, or we could go straight across the park in the dirt here. It's really a short distance when you think about it.
It'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
I am looking forward to that, too, yeah. Let's see some of the design of that.
Councilmember Grimes?
Are there any revenue implications to switching from Verizon? The money for this is not coming from the cable revenues, or is it?
It's the special revenue fund for the cable.
But it would be in either, it could still be used for the fiber installation if that's
Yes.
the way we, yeah, okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yes, Councilmember Schultz.
And isn't it, this source of money been a concern that the revenue, the proceeds have been coming in, and we've had difficulty figuring out the ways that we can spend it that would be in compliance with the condition of the grant?
Yes, I mean, we've spent a lot of money, and we've done some wonderful projects. This would be one of those things that could be funded.
Okay, I understand. I want to make sure I was talking about the right, or thinking of the right fund. Thank you.
The other item on the next page is for video conferencing equipment, which we're also planning to use the same fund. And what that would do, it would allow us to broadcast from a conference room here. We would think of another area where we could enhance we could extend our cable production capabilities from another room that was wired to do this. And at the same time, we would improve our conferencing, our conference equipment. We have conference rooms where you can conduct a modern-day meeting. There's no wireless, there's no projector, there's no screens. So there's a dual purpose for this. There is a use for the city, but we're also with the capabilities to put content on cable, which is somehow a way of meeting our definition or our usage.
And it also means that we could have facilities that would better enable us to participate in video conferences. Organizations that we are members of now are making participation in meetings possible through video conferencing, like MML and COG. Those policies have changed, and there are now opportunities to participate, so this would make it much easier to do that.
I don't know if you want to talk about the following years, but that's it for me this year. Is there anything
Probably just if there's something to point out for upcoming years that would be good just to have on our radar.
Yeah, coming up in FY14, we have been told by our current phone equipment provider that it's reached the end of its life. This year, it's reaching the end of its life.
Gee, we just got this.
2001. Yeah. We have an NEC phone switch, and that's what this is all about there. The NEC IPS 2000 has reached the end of its life. It's now about the size of a hot water heater on the wall. The new ones are all rack mounted and are just about 2 inches thick. So that's basically what we're going to go to. We're probably going to stay with NEC because we could keep our existing phone instruments. We could phase those in if we wanted to. We probably, with this much money, we may have enough to replace some of the phones. We do get complaints from time to time about folks that the phones don't have good sound. The technology in 2001 had speakerphone and speaker capabilities and conferencing, but the phone switching, there's a clipping that goes on where the voice cuts, and sometimes the conversation is not as fluent as it could be if more than one person is talking in a room. So that our conference capabilities, our conference phone capabilities in the existing phones are not state of the art. They're not new technology. So we probably want to upgrade that. We do have some money there for document imaging, and we've been talking about this for a while. And our first thing was going to try to get the city clerk's office with some document imaging and getting their paper electronically. And this is a figure that Jesse got, and we're hoping that this will get us started, basically. Some of the stuff could be costly, especially if you're going to try to go back and get everything you've had electronically. If we decide to just start from now on, you can do it.
So we get a lot of documents not electronically still?
This would enhance our capabilities in searching. We do have our stuff electronically. But, this would help us in searching and querying what we have. And another way of getting additional things that are like our accounting and financial invoicing, some of those things in electronic form. We still are pretty much a paper operation in that financial. So this will look at it holistically, the whole organization, but me and Jesse are the ones that actually have talked about this. Get some of her paperwork. And I'll welcome your thoughts on that if you think that's a good idea of what we want.
I want to check, I see Councilmember Mayle and Councilmember Grimes. You want to ask now, or?
Quick, yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah, to put on your list for materials that are now processed on paper that really should be electronically, electoral materials in the city, campaign contribution reports and stuff like that. It's a matter of fundamental open government to have that kind of stuff in electronic form, searchable online, and I would ask you to make that a priority.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Mayle.
Yeah, I just have one to add. In talking about the phone contract, I note that we have 160 digital phones and 65 cell phones, so that's more than one per staff person and council member. And I would just think if we can reduce the number of move toward smartphones and away from desk phones, that would be a good thing, or vice versa. But I'm assuming it's not that direction. I'm just curious, why we need that many wired devices.
If you have a desk, you have a phone.
Does it have to be that way?
Well, your desk one doesn't need charging. Doesn't need to be maintained that way. But there's opportunities there. I know that if you're on the street, if you're a policeman or you're a public works person, you don't have a desk phone, but you have so that's why you see there's a lot more there. But mostly if you have a desk, you have a phone and you have a computer. And along with that landline, there's also voicemail. Yeah.
I'm getting rid of my home phone.
I'm thinking of getting rid of my home phone. Yeah. There's one more, and that's the government financial software that SunGuard government. They have done a lot of improvements and a lot of changes. Currently, we're a client database type of software. They're moving to web-based. It's a web-based software, and that's what we're looking at. This figure is based on our initial cost for what we currently have, and whatever we thought was prudent to take as an increase, because we've had the current system. I don't have before you came to work, Javonda, a couple of years before. So I think we're close to 10 years on our existing software.
I think the first year was 2003.
2003.
Councilmember Slippery.
Yeah, I hope you'll do some testing on the web-based system, because the federal government has had some difficulty with those systems because they can be much slower than the client-server kind of environment. And until the infrastructure in your building and so on, as well as whatever the internet speeds are, can have a really quite significant effect on it. There are some big pluses too. It's not that they're all minuses, but a little performance review would be worthwhile.
I think that's got Windows in it. It tends to take a little more bandwidth and a little more. Our current system is Unix, and it is fast. It's amazing what it can do with the server that it has, and you can really tell that budget time. I think when everybody's doing a lot of queries, it just kicks right along. If it was a Windows-based, I would need probably 3 servers to do the work of 1.
Right.
Yeah.
And that just reminds me, it's not something we're talking about now, but thinking about the Unix-based, the library userful system, that's Unix-based, and that's like we basically turn it over every 4 years.
It's Linux, but yeah, it's some that's on here for several years out, isn't it?
Yeah, it just
July
reminded me of it.
It's not in my
I know.
I saw it, though.
It's in FY15.
FY15.
Okay.
Yeah, software and hardware. It is in mine. Okay.
Anything else on special revenue or capital? Okay.
All right. Thank you.
One final check on anything general government before we move along. Okay, we'll move to debt service. Which, as a reminder, is right after where we just were in the book. 115.
Just as the name implies, this budgetary unit is where the city accounts for all its debt service costs. That would be both principal and interest payments. Included in your budget binder is a kind of a detailed breakdown of the debt that we currently have. As I mentioned last week, my proposed budget does anticipate an early redemption of the bond that we had taken out for the Maryland State Retirement System. As some of the more tenured members of the council may recall, we previously used to make an annual payment through the non-departmental budgetary unit, and basically the interest rates were such that we were actually going further and further in the hole as we made payments. So I had recommended, and the council had concurred, that we should basically just take out a bond issue and basically pay it off in one fell swoop, which is what we have done. Because of higher than anticipated revenues in prior years and lower than projected expenditures, we do have some one-time money, and it was my recommendation that we use some of those funds to pay off that particular bond issue. It has an approximate cost of about $1.2 million. It has a fixed interest rate of 3.59% at this point in time, and Yvonne can correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're well below 1% in terms of our rate of return on our investment. So from my perspective, if you have the cash, it makes financial sense just to go ahead and get this debt off the books. As I had also mentioned last week during my budget presentation, I had also recommended that we essentially reserve some of the unreserved fund balance for the eventual early redemption of the 2005 community center bond issue. That will not show up in this budgetary unit. It's essentially a reservation of fund balance, but it is not a budgeted item, so that's why you don't see it accounted for here. Overall, compared to last year's budget for debt service, as proposed, this would go down by about $573,000, or just under 27%. The difference is obviously in FY12, we are doing an early redemption of the 2002 community center bond issue, which is a larger amount than what we would be paying towards the pension redemption. We also, in FY12, paid off, we'll be paying, I think we have actually made it, the final payment on a capital lease that we had taken out some years ago for police cars, and the 2004 street improvement bond issue. While you see a reduction in the debt service unit for the street improvement bond, it is essentially offset by an equal increase in our capital costs for street improvements. We went from essentially, having some debt payments to basically going to a cash basis to maintain our streets. So.
And you mentioned in all of this the fixed rate on the debt.
On the retirement bond, yes.
On that one, can you just characterize the rate structure on all of our debt, whether there's some that are fixed and some that are variable?
Yeah, the more recent ones have been fixed. The bonds for the Public Works facility, I'm going to look to Yvonne in case I'm wrong, is actually fixed. That had a rate of 2.97%. The rate on the 2005 community center bond issue is a variable rate. The rate is, I believe, going up in the out years. And Yvonne, I think you had said it's going to be, it either is or is approaching roughly 6%. Is that correct?
It's more 4%.
4%? Okay.
Up to about 4.2%.
Okay, I apologize, I misspoke.
Okay, so the ones that we're considering paying off have potential upsides to that in avoiding increase in rate.
On the community center bond issue, that is correct. The reason I'm not proposing that we pay off this one instead of the lower interest rate one is that it is not callable or cannot be redeemed until halfway through, which is fiscal year 2015.
Right. But the one that you're proposing to pay off for the pension arrearage that we had is
It's
3.59, which is higher than some of the other more recent, some of the other fixed rate ones.
It is a fixed rate, but certainly as interest rates have fallen, Public Works was obviously the more recent one, rates have gone down.
Right. And it's essentially, this potential payoff is a payoff of a loan that we took to avoid the problems with the previous loan, where the amount that we owed kept increasing even though we were paying what we were supposed to pay every year. And it, in turn, was structured as a 40-year by the state to pay off the arrearage that their actuaries came up with eons ago.
Yeah, my recollection, Mayor, is that the city dealt with that issue in the mid-1990s. I believe it was around 1995. And the city elected to have a 40-year amortization or payback period. The issue, which would be very standard with a retirement plan, is the state retirement plan was going to assess what its actuarial assumed rate of return. And most pension plans at that time were running anywhere from 7.5% to 8%. So we were essentially paying 7.5% to 8% interest, and basically not even keeping up. We were getting further and further behind.
Right, and that's why we did the loan that we're now considering
paying off.
Her.
That's correct.
Okay. Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 115, where the debt service stuff is talked about, it's a little confusing to me. It took me a while to figure this out because there are no markers to the different bonds on it. So am I correct that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 discussed?
That is correct.
Okay.
I apologize for the confusion. We can certainly try to make that more clear in its final publication.
Okay. Then if that's true, I think I do understand all of it then. Because I was reading along, and I was then starting into the next one and wondering how that all fit together.
Right, so I think I drew my own lines in this one.
Right.
And in the first column, the first piece is ends with the first chart, and the last figure is $2,513,168. Draw a line under there.
Yeah.
On April 21st starts section 2. That finishes under the $1,032,000 to redeem bond principal.
Yes.
Then section 3 starts with on July 27th. It goes to the bottom of the chart with 1.410 million, and the fourth section is starting in June 2004.
Right. That's
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then the total indebtedness that we currently have, do you happen to have that figure?
I can see if Jesse can maybe look it up. It was part of the January 30th and 31st packet. It would basically show what the total debt was projected as of June 30th of 2012. So you can just bear with us a minute.
I saw it. I thought we had it somewhere.
Yeah.
I know the figure I calculated on this was totaling up the debt service interest payments for FY13, and it came to about $158,000, and a penny on the tax rate is about $194,000.
I'm sorry, say again.
157,773, and a penny on the tax rate is $194.
I have our long-term debt as of June 30th, 2011, from the
Okay.
CAPA.
Okay.
Okay, included in this is the compensated absences of $723,000, but all total is about $7 million.
Jesse's still trying to get it to come up easily. The figure that Yolanda just mentioned would obviously be reduced because we had a number of debt that was being paid off in fiscal year 12. So if as soon as Jesse can get the system to come up, we'll give you that figure. Jesse just said her computer is not happy. Abel fled the building, so.
Can we just get that back?
Yeah, you can just get back to someone.
Okay. Is that it for you?
Yep.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. In general, I like the idea of less debt, but for me, this represents a sort of a policy choice. Last year, the council paid off $1 million of debt early, and here in this budget, we have a little bit over $1 million, and then a $750,000 reservation from the general fund balance for a future payoff. Now, that latter one won't change the interest we pay, at least because we have to pay interest. I'm assuming we're accumulating interest payments up through 2015 when we could pay off early. To me, it looks to me like we're bringing in more tax money than we have a clear priority to spend, or using it to pay down debt because that's a sort of a surprising turn of events that we have more revenue than we have previously identified expenses. So, for example, presumably when we negotiated these loans, we negotiated the long terms on these loans because we thought it was going to take that long to pay them off. And so we were negotiating a higher interest rate for that reason. The other thing I would say is that the things that we paid the loans for, in particular this building, they represent an investment in capital and in infrastructure that we benefit and we pay for through the current the initial contributions and the loan we've gotten, but that future taxpayers will also benefit from. And so for me, in contrast to my personal mortgage, which I would like not to have, debt like this at a community level is a shared burden of providing a service over time. And so I'm not saying I don't want to do any debt pay down. I certainly do. But I just think this suggests that we have room to consider other things, other uses for at least some of this money. We've talked about Tacoma Junction as a priority. We've talked about some of the policing costs. We've talked about whether we should keep a flat tax rate or whether we should keep flat property tax revenues. Those are all areas to me, for discussion. And I would just say that I would be supportive of paying down some of the debt, but not as much as is currently in this budget structure.
Thoughts from council members or thoughts from the city manager on that? Councilmember Grimes?
I'll just quickly say that I can support further discussion of Councilmember Mail's point.
Same here.
I'm sure we can collectively and individually come up with lots of points where we could that could stand to be have additional funding, and the question of capacity to execute does come into play. Thank you.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
I'm also wanting to discuss Councilmember Mail's proposal a little bit further. I'm basically in agreement with him. I'd like to see some of the debt paid down, but take some of that money and put it other places this year, specifically the junction.
Councilmember Schultz.
I think part of this, the issue that Councilmember Mayle raises is the question of the interest rate environment in which the city is functioning. And the interest rate environment in the United States over the last 3 years has been rather unique in the sense that rates across the country have been extremely low, of unprecedented levels going back 50 years practically. For example, residential mortgage rates are setting or going back to times that we never thought would ever come again in terms of the low interest rates. And in that environment, what happens is that you look at the cost of funds and you sort of say, well, and this is what the city manager has been saying, is that we're making so little money on our investments that it makes sense to use this cash to pay down our debt. And that makes sense today, but as soon as interest rates start to rise, then our strategies are going to have to change. And I think interest rates are going to start rising inevitably at some point, at which point we may be borrowing, and we were wishing, gosh, I wish we hadn't paid off those long-term bonds that we had at say, 3.59%, which now seems really high. A few years ago, that would have been a heck of a bargain. And so I understand the argument that's used to sort of say now's a good time to pay off our debt. It's not as though we are pushing the limits of our debt capacity. We have plenty of room to borrow if we need to. It's just I think we need to think of this argument, this debate or discussion we want to have in the context of the prospect of a rising interest rate environment, as opposed to what we've had over the last 3 years, which has kept rates so incredibly low. And I think if we think in those terms, Councilmember Mayle's point might be even stronger than he's already made the case. In other words, we may wish that we hadn't been so quick to pay off some of this debt in 2013 fiscal year. In a few 3 or 4 years out, when interest rates on bonds might be 5-6%. Anyway.
Councilor Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm trying to understand, is it possible to pay down the current long-term bonds that we have, but at the same time go to the market and take out another loan at the today's interest rates, which are much lower?
Is it possible? Well, the Public Works facility is at a rate of 2.97%. I don't pay that close attention to municipal bond rates. I don't know what they are, but that's pretty doggone low in historical terms. I don't know if you get anything lower than
We got to
that.
pay this off because they're high, and so if they're high, if we pay them off, does that imply that we can get new bonds that are lower at a lower rate?
It simply means that the next time we need to borrow for some particular reason, because we don't have any cash to do on a pay-as-you-go basis, we may be borrowing at a much higher rate if the interest rates start to go up. Inevitably, they're going to go up someday because they've been at this low level, historically low level. It's hard to conceive that they could go much lower.
The city manager wants to say something, but let me just add on to Councilmember Siemens' question that I think it also, part of that question is, or is it possible to make, double up payments, make early payments within the same loan structure?
Yolanda may know off the top of her head.
can you just make, you can make, for some of the bond issues, you can actually just make extra payment. It depends on the structure of the bond issue themselves. I think for this one, since it doesn't, you can make partial or a full redemption at any time. There's no issue. That's not applicable on the community center bond issue from 2005. So we'd need to look at each bond issue. I think other than the 2005 community center bond issue, I think there is some, Ronnie, correct me if I'm wrong, is there a timing issue for redemption for the Public Works Facility bond issue? You and I had looked at that. I think our assessment was that the interest rate on the pension bond was higher, therefore if you were going to make any extra payments, that's the one you would gear them towards. In answer to Councilmember Seaman's question in terms of just doing essentially kind of a bond refinancing, interest rates that we are getting on our own investments are a different animal than the interest rates you will get on a bond issue. They're not the same thing. I haven't talked to any cities who've gone out to market for bond issues recently. I could certainly check with someone at the state. Since you're usually doing bond issues for periods of, 7 years, 10 years, especially in this kind of, uncertain interest rate market, I think what you're going to see is any bonds are basically going to be higher than you might expect because they're hedging their bets, or they will basically make sure that there's not redemption provisions. There's a lot of ways that they're going to make sure that they're protected in terms of their bonds. There's also cost, obviously, associated with doing refinancing. So my guess, and that's all it is simply a guess, is by the time you average everything out, you probably wouldn't save all that much money. But I can certainly just put a call in to someone at the state and see if they track the market all the time from the local government infrastructure program and see if they have a sense of how that's working.
Because I have one point that I want to bring up about in response to Councilmember Mayall's inquiry. And I think what it sounds like is that the council would like to have some continued discussion around this particular point. And I think the way I'd like to do it is to say, okay, we'll find the right time to kind of have a dedicated piece on this. And I think what we should do is get through a little bit more of the various sections of the budget that we haven't done yet, so we've got a little bit more perspective and we can find some places where we might want to do this. But I think the thing that I want to ask now, and it may be that the city manager can supply a sense of an answer now, or it might be that it is just part of that ongoing discussion that we get back to. I was thinking about the potential trade-off with using some of the money for debt payoff as opposed to basically operational issues, and thinking about how that might be affected by staff capacity to do something where essentially you're taking money and writing a check, and that money is spent, as opposed to directing the money toward particular projects that staff would have to manage, and what our capacity is to do that, so that we have, I'm assuming that's a piece that we need to think about if that's the direction that we want to move, so that it might be that part of the cost of making that decision would be, oops, we might need more staff.
I think, Mayor Williams, you're touching on an issue that I think Councilmember Grimes was also alluding to, which is doing any kind of debt payment is simply a matter of Yvonne and I filing papers and truthfully wiring funds. It's a very low staff workload project. So I do think, as both Councilmember Grimes and Mayor Williams have said, I think as you look, if you want to consider other alternatives, that's certainly, as Councilmember Mayall indicated, a policy decision. Sometimes, and I've said this before to the council in different settings, sometimes the issue isn't funding, it's the staff capacity to carry out projects. So not knowing what each of you may have in mind, I think that would certainly be something that we would have to take into account. The last thing that I guess I would want to see is a whole lot of money put into the budget for a project and not have the staffing capacity to actually implement it. The other comment I would make is some of the fund balance that we are using to make this payment may have accumulated over a period of time. It's revenues, as I think we talked about during the discussion of the CAFR back in November. we might have had revenues come in higher, or, for example, this year we have considerable number of staff turnover. So we have sort of one-time savings. As you think through other things you may want to use this funding for, please give some thought to the distinction between non-recurring expenses, which is what this payment would be, versus creating an ongoing obligation of the city that we may not be able to fund. And I do have, Jesse successfully found the answer to the question. As of June 30th of 2012, our bonded indebtedness would be in the range of $4.44 million. And that is after these other bond issues we've talked about have been paid off.
So that's about, what, quick and dirty, 16% of our overall budget. Somewhere in that range. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I want to thank, not to get too much into something we haven't, we're scheduled to discuss at a later time, housing and community development. I want to thank the director there, Sarah Ann Daines, for tipping me off to something that I had missed, that there's just an item that says partner with local business associations to preserve and create attractive and viable commercial areas. Councilmember Mayle mentioned in particular Tacoma Junction. That is a viable model to partner with community organizations to carry out certain functions that they are quite well suited to carry out, where the city would be providing the strategic directions and funding, and the organizations would actually match some of that funding, perhaps with a significant amount of volunteer labor. That is a way of, to use an overused already term, exploiting a force multiplier, where we can accomplish certain objectives with relatively minimal staff commitment.
Councilmember Mayle.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that, Mayor, I support your proposal to tee this issue back up again after we've made it through more departmental discussions.
Okay, anything else on debt service? Okay, then the final section for this evening, which is non-departmental. Just back at page 108.
Well, as the name would imply, these are expenditures that don't tend to fit neatly into a particular departmental category, so they sort of get lumped into non-departmental. This is going to include items such as some of our liability insurance, our workers' comp insurance, employee training, the local supplement to the state credit. This is, the one we talked about last week that is geared towards lower and middle income residents. So it actually includes a fairly wide variety of functions. Approximately 49% of non-departmental expenditures as proposed for next year would be personnel related, and just to clarify, none of these costs are tied to full-time equivalents. We do not budget staff in the non-departmental budgetary unit. So what you're going to see in this personnel section of the budget is going to be workers' comp insurance. We include our unemployment benefit cost. And there is an allocation, as I mentioned on the cover sheet, as well as in your budget binder, for possible wage adjustments and the implementation of a market compensation study. In each of the individual departmental budgets, there is a 1% wage adjustment that is included in each of the individual departmental budgets. That is equivalent to the employment cost index for December of 2011, which is the federal labor index that we usually try to track off of. This year there are kind of two unusual things going on. One is that we have wage reopeners in both collective bargaining agreements. Those negotiations are what did you say, Susie?
They are to happen.
They are to happen. We also, as I mentioned last week, and we'll be presenting that to the council shortly, working with our compensation consultant, we've done a market compensation study. And this is not necessarily a wage adjustment issue per se, but it's a salary structure issue, and those are the pay grades. It's what is our minimum starting salary, what should the maximum salary be, and we have a group of cities that we benchmark to. So those issues will be bringing more information back to the council. Clearly, we do need to negotiate the final wages. As Susie mentioned, we haven't really even started. We've had, I think, a kind of a sit-down meeting just to go over some basic budgetary issues and things of that nature. Services and charges represent about 11% of this particular budget, and the major item in this category is going to be our liability property auto insurance. We do participate in the local government insurance trust. The numbers that are in the budget are estimates. One of the complicating things about budgeting those costs is as a founding member of Legit, we do get some longevity credits, and there's some experience credits, and we don't know what those are until much further along. Some of the more tenured members of the council may recall that we had a partnership with Park and Planning. This was to buy a piece of property. And Suzanne can certainly speak to this more. Our contribution would be funding the demolition of the structure on that property. This was actually budgeted this fiscal year, but they've run into some complications, so the funding was essentially rebudgeted for fiscal year 13. Suzanne, is there anything you want to add? Since you're kind of the expert on this particular topic.
No, I mean, this is a house on Sligo Mill Road that is in bad shape, but there was some difficulties with the entity that was to tear it down, and so it's discussions between Park and Planning and that entity that have kind of dragged on a little bit.
And this is the one on Sligo Mill Road in the section, in the block of Sligo Mill, all by itself back in the woods.
Right, kind of behind Jiffy Lube.
Moving on, this particular budget has an unusual amount of expenditures classified as miscellaneous. I would just say I didn't pick these categories. This is how they were when I arrived. But what you'll see in the miscellaneous category for the non-departmental budgetary unit is the state homeowners property tax credit supplement. That's budgeted at $160,000. We typically have anywhere from about 160 to 170 households who qualify for that. As we talked about last week, they do have to submit an application to the state. We get a list of those who are awarded a tax credit by the state, and then we match it up to 50%. And this is generally it's income qualified, and there's also limits on the assessed valuation of the property in terms of what qualifies. By the charter, there is a general contingency account that we are required to budget. It is 0.5% of general operating revenues. So for fiscal year 13, as revenues stand today, that general contingency amount is roughly $105,000. We also include funding for employee training, our employee tuition reimbursement program. As I think the council is aware, we do a solicitation each year through the stormwater fee billing to see if people would like to make a donation to provide emergency assistance. That is actually handled through a nonprofit. We don't handle that ourselves. For the past maybe 5 years or more, we have also supplemented those donations to the tune of $15,000. Certainly, it's been a very tough time in the economy, and there's lots of people who are in need of utility assistance or something of that nature. The one item, whether you do it this evening or later in the budget process, I would like the council to discuss is the allocation I made for council-directed initiatives. This was a allocation I chose to put in the budget this year, recognizing that every budget season there's something that the council would like to see included that I did not. There's obviously some discretion about what that amount should be. My hope would be through this budget process, the council as a whole would discuss what it may or may not wish to use that funding for, and if there is not a specific plan for the funding coming out of this budget process, I would encourage you just to remove the funding from the budget. It is a reasonably large amount, and if there is not a specific goal that the council has in mind for its use, then I would encourage you just to take it out of the budget. The only other thing I would probably mention about the non-departmental budgetary unit is this is where we fund any kind of financial contributions to external organizations. Most of these were discussed by the council in either late January or early February.
both in your budget binder as well as on the agenda cover sheet. I've outlined the organizations that would be funded as proposed. These are all organizations or purposes that the council previously discussed, I think with one exception, which would be the Small Community Grants Program. We did not specifically talk about what to budget for that for next year, but the other funding amounts reflect the council's direction from earlier this calendar year.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. City Manager Matthews mentioned maybe 3 or 4 minutes ago property tax credits assistance to that are often income conditioned, as they should be. I want to raise an issue without having a solution at this moment, and I actually printed out and are sitting in my printer at home copies for each of the people on the dais, something called the Self-Sufficiency Standard for Maryland, which is produced by, at the behest of something called the Maryland Community Action Partnership. I believe the income thresholds for instance, for some of these assistance programs are on the order of $60,000 a year income. That needs to be researched a little bit. Affordability is definitely a problem in our community. It's one that constituents have brought to me, not only elderly folks who are on fixed incomes, but also people who are working families. So, for instance, for Montgomery County, Maryland, in the figures in this 2012 Self-Sufficiency Standard report talk about the minimum income needed for families of various types. For instance, 2 adults and an infant, minimum income needed according to the study, $68,825 a year. 2 adults, infant, and preschooler, that's family of 4, $89,784. You get the idea that one can be essentially struggling with a fairly substantial income that would do you very well in other parts of our country. One can be struggling here in Maryland, in Montgomery County in particular, with incomes at these levels. So I would like to consider the income thresholds for the assistance programs that the City of Tacoma Park provides, and I will attempt to come up with specific proposals for discussion there.
If I can just follow up on that, I wanted to find out, it sounded from the discussion, I think, last week when this came up, that the old limits or the old parameters for the state program had changed or gone away, and I wondered how that would impact what we were able to do within the existing program that we use, because my recollection is that this was the one that we wanted to go with, because then we didn't have to income qualify people, we didn't have to do all of the paperwork, we just piggyback on the state system, and they provide the criteria and basically all of the work that goes into it, and all we have to do is apply our formula, and it makes that therefore fairly easy to do. But I wonder how that has changed and how that would affect what we're able to do.
Your understanding, Mayor, of the actual process is correct, and Yolanda's office actually does the calculations, but we get a worksheet from the state of Maryland. It also shows, I believe, the county credits that are given. One of the things that we've had to watch the last few years is to make sure that when the credits all are combined, that we're not essentially paying someone to basically live in their homes, and that has been a factor. We basically get the amount of the state credit. We basically apply the formula, do this check, as I mentioned, to make sure that we're not reimbursing someone collectively more than they actually paid in taxes. What I think you're recalling, Mayor Williams, is my statement last week. At one point, there was a cap in state law of a local supplement of 50%. This was an issue, and I'll need to dig out my notes, but that I had talked to the Assistant City Attorney, Linda Perlman, about a number of years ago, and I believe that 50% cap has been eliminated. What we can also do prior to Thursday night's budget hearing is just simply pull up the state legislation, which would have the income and assessed valuation caps. My recollection on the assessed valuation is it's limited, capped at the first $300,000. I may be wrong, Councilmember Grimes, but my recollection is that the income threshold was higher than about $70,000. But I do understand your concern.
So if I may interject, there's also the concern that a statewide formula that works for Calvert County or Cumberland is not going to work for Montgomery County and Tacoma Park.
Yeah, it is a statewide cap, you're correct.
Right. So it would be good to know what's changed with the system that we're in, and knowing what that is, whether there's another way to do it that may or may not involve a lot more work on our part to do, but may be worthwhile doing.
Sure, we'll be happy to look into that.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. Just sticking to this issue for a moment, I'd be interested to know whether for the program, and I can't remember the number exactly, but I think we've earlier talked about 100 or so families, residents participating in this program. If we talk about expanding it, I would also want to know whether the existing program has had more demand than we've had resources to pay for. If it hasn't, then that's not necessarily a problem per se, but we need to do some education or advertising to make it work. Does that make sense?
Yes, I can probably answer your second question. I've been here almost 8 years, and I can never think of a time where we have had we've always fully funded any request that met the criteria.
Yeah, it's about 160.
Yeah, it's about 160 to 170 households per year.
And it started out, I think we were capped at like 15%, then we could go to 35, and then we went to 50.
Yeah, what I recall, Councilmember Mayo, when I first started, I think we were serving about 130 to 135 households. The state redefined the parameters, which actually opened it up for more people. And I think my recollection, and Susie may be able to help me with this, is I think we have advertised, the Housing and Community Development Department has advertised the state application deadlines in the city newsletter and other venues.
Yeah, we get the word out pretty well to folks, I think. And it's also advertised through Montgomery County for their program, so people start to hear about it and apply.
My second point was about the grants that are listed at the end of this narrative, and I remember from our earlier discussion that we talked about providing $1,000 or $1,500 to the Women's Business, Tacoma Park Women's Business Network, which I don't see reflected in here, and I think that's an accurate reflection of our earlier conversation about that.
I'm looking to Jesse because we went over our respective notes, and we did not recall seeing that in there.
I think Councilmember Schultz made an indication that he would have supported, and I don't remember if it was $1,000 or $1,500. I indicated a second in some sense for that, and I think there were some other head nods at the table.
It's possible that when we were talking about large grants, we recognized that they had also applied for a small grant, and then it didn't get funded as a small.
When we had this small grant discussion, we actually talked about the fact that we had said in the large grants.
Yeah.
So in the large grant discussion, we talked about small grants, and then the small grants, we talked about what the large grants.
Yeah, the net is, I think, that the consensus was what you said.
Jesse was just saying they received funding through the Small Community Grant Program for FY12.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
And we have not accepted applications for FY13 since the budget isn't adopted, but we can go back and confirm that amount. But Jesse handles the grants, and that's your recollection? We'll verify that.
Because if it was the small ones, it was for this fiscal year.
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. We'll verify
I don't
that.
remember. Okay. We just confirmed that.
We'll
That'd be
confirm
great.
that, yeah.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments on non-departmental?
Yeah.
That light just went out, now it's back on again.
Well, I couldn't tell whether it was on or off. I kept pushing it.
Councilmember Schultz.
Sorry. To City Manager Matthews, you alluded to the allocation for the council-directed initiatives of $50,000 and wanted us to think about whether or not that should stay in or not. But I notice it's not in your non-departmental, in the three-ring binder. It's not referenced there, but it broken out as it is in the budget in the work session item number 5. Is that $50,000 included in the overall proposed FY13?
Yeah, and my apologies, that was not noted. I think it's just doing one too many budget binder information sheets. Yes, it is included in the miscellaneous category.
Okay. That's all I wanted to know.
And I had one question, and I kind of get twisted up in how I want to ask this, so I'll try my best, and if it doesn't seem clear, I'll try it again. Thinking about the pension contribution information that the state actuaries provided, that took it, that it's currently 10.94% and it would go to 8.99%. I'm wondering whether the whole process of dealing with elected officials needing to be in the state pension system and the one-time lump payment in the current fiscal year in any way changed the calculation of that figure or had an effect on it?
No, absolutely.
Totally independent?
Absolutely not. The retro payment that you're referencing would show up in the legislative division budget of the general government department. That's why you'll see fringe benefits go down.
Right. I saw that there.
No, the rate is actuarially determined
Right.
based on the June 30th of 2011 actuarial evaluation done on behalf of the state retirement system.
And that's for the overall
system-wide.
system, system-wide, so that's
Correct.
not the city's piece, it's system-wide.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions in this section?
Just one, following up on the comment that Councilmember Schultz made about the $50,000. City Manager Matthews, and I noticed you indicated that if we essentially don't define or suggest the ways we'd want to spend it, that you'd recommend taking it out of the budget, and I'm just curious if you could explain why.
A number of reasons. I think it's a relatively large amount. I just think if you're going to have a budget, there should be at least some sense of how you intend to use it, and my concern is in the absence of that. I'm going to give a nod to Councilmember Snipper. You're more than likely to have a budget variance at year end, and even though you won't be here, I'm sure you'll be tracking it from Italy. But secondarily, I think in the absence of a plan, my concern is that we would essentially be taxing people, which I know is a concern of yours, with a likelihood that the money may not be spent. I'm not saying it has to be down to the nth degree, but I think there should be at least some consensus on the part of the council that's fairly narrow as to how you want to see the funding used, so it can be factored into staff work plans. Otherwise, I'm concerned we'll find ourselves 6 months down the road in the budget process and no further along with the money being spent.
Okay, thank you.
You're familiar with a process like that?
Yes, you are.
Yep.
I did not say that.
Don't need to.
Okay. Then the last thing we want to do is make sure that we have a chance for any requests for the city manager to provide additional information, or if we need to kind of do a check on where we are on things. And I wanted to take the opportunity to, I've got a little list here of things, and some of them we may have addressed throughout the evening, but I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of them. So the list I've got is, this was partially addressed, and I want to make sure I understood it correctly about the information from the market study for compensation, that we're not expecting to get that information during this particular short budget window where we are.
My intention.
That's what I thought, and then I thought what you said later was, no, we're just going to have it as part of the ongoing discussions.
We have, there's two pieces to it. I think particularly, and Suzanne can correct me if I'm wrong, particularly in the ASME contract, I don't remember specific language in the Local 400 contract, but in the ASME collective bargaining agreement, there is actual formal provisions regarding the sharing of information regarding the market study. Certainly, if I'm going to be giving information to a collective bargaining unit, I'm going to be sharing that with the city council. I just truthfully need to find the time to just talk to our compensation consultant and have her just, I've gotten all the pieces. I was just going to see if she could put it in a nice package for me.
Okay,
to give
so
out to
we
you.
should be expecting that within the next couple of weeks?
Probably within the next 10 days is my hope.
Okay. And we had an earlier request for getting from the Public Works Director, I think, the equipment replacement reserve table extended to the out years?
She sent me an email when I was out of the office. Yvonne and I have a few issues we need to go over, and I'm hoping that will be to you probably in the same week to 7-10-day period.
Okay. And you had said that you thought there was money in the budget for lighting for the front of the building. Did you find that?
I believe Darrell told me it was not, and she was supposed to go back and get a cost. There's a number of other projects, but I don't believe that is in here because she was still waiting on cost from a contractor.
Okay, so that's a potential reconciliation.
That's correct.
Okay. I think Ms. Brooks was going to come back with the amount or the percentage concerning the speed camera fund, where if we have too much, we have to give money back to the state.
Yes.
I did a quick calculation based on the fiscal 13 numbers, and we're not near that threshold that we have to owe money back to the state.
And not in any danger of getting there.
Not based on what was proposed in the 13.
Okay. We will need a reconciliation item to raise the money for legal services, conference attendance, and association membership.
Is that right?
It's in there, but it's not enough. Which became obvious when I had to deal with the attendance of the city attorney, and the city manager said there was, what,
$750. That was for the conferences, and then I don't recall, Mayor, the amount for dues.
Right, so it's not enough since the
I
contract...
saw it in there.
Since the contract says that we're supposed to provide the opportunity for them to go to the summer conference and the legislative conference,
Right.
and membership in 2 associations, and that doesn't begin to cover it.
Okay.
We talked about the homeowner property tax credit. We had talked about, I noticed in the February 23rd minutes that we adopted this evening, that we had talked a little bit about the railroad and public utility tax rates, and that we were interested in having them go up a little bit, but I don't see anything in the budget indicating what those rates are.
It's 2.5 times 58 cents, whatever that is.
Right.
They are the same as last year, pending getting direction from the council as to what she wanted those rates to be. They were not changed. It's $1.45.
Right, okay, so we had talked about taking those up a little bit, potentially not both of them the same amount up, but doing that. So I think we'll need to make sure that we have an opportunity to discuss that and provide direction on that.
And we should do that before we get to reconciliation.
Yes,
So we have an idea
yes.
of amount.
And I guess it's going to be tough to come up with a potential impact, but we just, I guess, at this point have to say, as you said earlier this evening, we have to remember that there's the potential for either the state budget or the county budget to have potential effect on us, depending on where they end up, and we just don't know where that's going to be, and we thought it was supposed to be kind of resolved by now, but it's not. It may not be resolved by the time we get to the end of our process. There may be a potential impact from that, and so we'll have to think about, as we reconcile the budget, kind of holding out that potential for a impact from doomsday that we thought we weren't going to have to factor in. And then just one final question for the city manager, not to be answered this evening, but thinking about upcoming discussion with the Recreation Department. And it was a question that, as a result of some discussions I've had with some people, I was wondering if there's any possibility for addressing bullying in the Recreation Department budget. And I'm not even quite sure what that would be, but I wondered if there's anything in there and the potential for doing anything like that.
I'll talk to Mr. Clark.
Say again, addressing?
Bullying. Anybody have anything they want to bring up? Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one, which you urged me to put off till later, so I am here.
Now's a chance.
Now's my chance. On the special revenue fund summary sheet that you included with item number 1, I didn't notice this before. I would have raised it before. On the special revenue funds, the balance appears to be growing quite large. In FY9 and 10, it was, 4 to 600,000, and now it's gone up substantially. Could you give some background on why it's up so much?
It's very simple. It's the capital cable equipment grant funds.
Ouch. Man. That's the problem, because, of course, we can't use that money for anything else particularly.
Susie can address that.
Very lousy.
Right.
I would love to be able to pay the cable staff with it.
Yeah, for example. Yeah, but there's no operating expenses, right, or very little.
We do have a separate operating grant that's accounted
Yeah, but
for in the
that's-
general
But it's
fund, but
Right.
we can spend that with no problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's smaller and it doesn't grow like the capital one.
Yeah,
does.
this one's really, because, we could devote some little effort to this, and it would pay off handsomely to come up with a way to spend, $1.5 million, just to pick a number.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a problem that many jurisdictions are facing, and it's a very frustrating one. We are having discussions, even now with Comcast, and we'll be going into Verizon and RCN in the coming year, to try to restructure some of that so that we'll have more flexibility with the funds. But some of it's a federal law issue that has not yet been resolved.
Yeah, and this was part of the discussion with the county cable administrator. I don't know about when she came here because I missed that meeting, but I know when she came to the Montgomery chapter of the Maryland Municipal League, and we talked about this very issue as part of the whole renegotiation of the cable franchise agreements.
It would be useful if you could provide the council with any actionable things we might do, give it some thought, make a few phone calls, and, I mean, it may just be nothing, which is fine, too, or not fine, but acceptable, but it would be nice to know if there is something we're not doing that we could do.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayo.
On this question around cable, if we put together a summary of what we currently use our funds for, is this an area where MML or COG or anyone else can provide us any creativity on how someone may have spent it somewhere else? It just seems like a good use of those resources to really try to explore that. The question I wanted to ask was, I noticed throughout the budget there's a line typically very, very small for employee recognition, $100, $200, $500. In a number of places in the proposed 2013 budget, it's zero, whereas in 12 or, for example, the communications department. I just wondered about that amount. I just don't know the details of what that is.
Let me try and answer that one, because I wondered the same thing. And then I noticed that I think in police there was a larger piece, and then in non-departmental there was a large piece.
If I may, there's two different pieces to how we have historically handled employee recognition. One is a service-based award, 5, 10, 15, 20, so that's obviously going to vary from year to year depending on employee anniversary dates. For example, this year one of our crossing guards, I guess it was actually in 2011, celebrated 40 years of service to the city. So there's a monetary gift card award associated with those service awards. We also have a program where employees can be nominated by their coworkers for a variety of things: exceptional customer service, exceptional teamwork, coming up with ideas that save the city money. There is an employee review committee that looks at those suggestions and makes recommendations to me as to which should be awarded funding and at what amount. So what you'll see in the non-departmental budget, it tends to get actually accounted for in payroll because it is a taxable benefit. But some of the funding in non-departmental goes to that, and then typically every year we have, as I think some of you know, we will close the building for about 2 hours, present the awards formally, and then we'll also have a lunch together as an entire city staff. So that's what you're seeing in non-departmental, and in the individual departmental budgets are the service awards that we know about.
Okay, thank you.
So it's bigger than it appears in the particular departmental lines. Councilmember Snipper.
One final. I will refrain from asking for my annual.
Just say, number one.
Yeah, I won't do it. No, I've decided this year not to ask for details about the cash flow on the general fund summary. In prior years, I've asked for it, and it's just not, I think it's fine the way it is. I'll leave it like that. I just want to note that I'm not.
Oh, you're not asking for it, but you're noting that you're not asking.
That's right.
Gotcha.
That's right.
Councilmember
You should be
Snipper.
glad I'm not asking.
Councilmember Snipper, I just can't help myself, because this is something you and I do every single year. Are you talking about why revenues came in higher or expenditures came in lower?
Well, there's actually a couple of pieces to this.
No, I'm just saying, if that is what he is looking for, I can give you the page number. I actually made a specific point this year of going ahead and
Yes, you
proactively
did.
addressing that
Yes,
question.
you did, which I appreciate. Just want to say that.
Any final questions? Okay, we're adjourned.
The pieces of my life lie shattered, splinters of what could have been. Red and orange, green and blue, how I suffered for their sin. Stained glass, see the colors. Stained glass, goodbye mother. Sharp and cruel, they made me bleed, all out of their desperate need. Carried each chart in a paper bag, till I knew what I really had. Stained glass, see the colors. Stained glass, goodbye father. When do we start again? Letting go of this heavy load, free us from the lion's den, set out for our own abode.